What's the Church of Scientology so afraid of?
This is
SPTV. Welcome, everybody. I'm joined today by Natalie WEBSTER. How's it going, Natalie?
Fabulous. It's a great day to not be in a cult.
Today is a great day not to be in a cult. It's truly amazing that you and I have never spoken in real life before until about 10 minutes ago.
I know. Now it's like worlds are colliding.
We have so many mutual friends.
Mhm.
We have a lot of shared history as far as Scientology and the Sea
Yeah.
Org goes. I mean, we've been friends on Facebook for probably 10 years.
Mhm. Yeah.
And anyway, this is going to be so much fun. Before we get started, everyone, we are also streaming on Natalie's channel, Tonka Talk, Lake Minnetonka Community and Connection. She has a podcast. Okay, so now this YouTube channel, help me not explain this incorrectly. You would actually prefer people subscribe to the actual podcast.
Yes.
That has the same name, right?
Yeah. So the podcast you can find anywhere you find them, and it's called Tonka Talk Community and Connection. And the long story short is my podcast is about the way people create and share community and connection. But on Fridays, I drop an episode where I share my Scientology story so people understand why I'm so obsessed with the ways people create community and connection because of my cult experience growing up in Scientology, how it impacted my family and my group and everything. Although I am likely going to be starting another YouTube channel where I can speak more about it. But for now, please do subscribe to the podcast or subscribe to the other Tonka Talk channel too. And then when I get another one going, we'll tell you.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, there's 100 different ways we could start this conversation. Let's just try to do it as organically as possible. So you've been in the real world. You've been out of Scientology for how long now?
Almost 13 years. I think it'll be 13 years in January. Yeah. It's taken me this long too that, like I said, when I first left, I was going to leave. I was going to leave quietly. And then, as Scientology loves to do, they tried to mess with my family. And so I became vocal. And then I spent several years. It's a lot to process, which I think people know. That kind of goes without saying. And I just needed more time to really immerse myself in the real world. I don't know about you, Aaron. I felt like an alien, like I had just arrived on the planet in ways, even though, I was out living life. You live in this isolated world in Scientology. And I've just been, exploring, figuring out who I am outside of Scientology without Scientology indoctrination. I'm still doing that. But now I'm kind of ready to talk about it. I'm ready to process it. I actually had some doctors tell me that I should really process it. And the idea of this is how I'm going to process it. I'm going to talk about it just with everybody because I think it's probably easier.
One of the things that I want to discuss as much as possible in a whole bunch of conversations in the future is going from the Scientology world, the Scientology way of thinking of right and wrong, the Scientology sense of morality, which is strangely puritanical for an organization that doesn't really think of itself as being religious, and leaving Scientology and no longer believing in the construct and the bullshit and the reactive mind and all this stuff, but still kind of being married to this Scientology aspect of or Scientology idea of morality, and how hard it is to get rid of the concepts of what L. Ron Hubbard, or the Sea Org thought was right and wrong. And I'll tell you, I'm mentioning that kind of at the same time I'm thinking of one of the reasons my wife and I have stayed married for so long, even though 5 years ago, we basically was like, this is insane. Like if we didn't have kids, we would already be divorced. Large part was because we wanted to do what we thought was best for the kids. But there was definitely another part of that was like, if we get a divorce, Scientology will have won.
And I can see how you would think that.
Yeah, still living in ways that are dictated by what Scientology would like or not like, or be happy about or not be happy about. And I'm wondering, because when you left Scientology, you were married. And how long after Scientology did you get a divorce? And did it have anything to do with the Scientology stuff?
It absolutely, I think, had a lot to do. My marriage had everything to do with Scientology. It was my second marriage. And I married my second husband after I had left the Sea Org, and I was a Scientology parishioner with one foot out the door. And our connecting, he was a very dedicated Scientologist, was encouraged by the local Twin Cities organization. We were kind of pushed towards each other. I think the thought was that, hey, Natalie's kind of, floating around there. Let's get her kind of solidly really back. And so it was encouraged when I started dating my husband. And we were married for, I think, about 11 years. And we left Scientology together. It's actually an unusual story in that 3 generations of my family left Scientology. It took me 2
Wow.
years. I don't even know where to start. But as far as my husband goes, after we left Scientology, it was within 2 years, my mom passed, and my mom had been on OT7, but she left with us. My mom died, and then I got a divorce. And it was kind of the beginning of like, okay, even though I've left Scientology and it was a couple years after, it's here I am 13 years later. And I feel like it's taking me this long. I don't feel that I'm all the way where I would like to be. I don't know that I will be. I think it's sometimes this idea of recovery. It's to me, it's like when you lose someone, when you lose someone and they die, like my mom, you get kind of more used to not having her around, but you still think about her. There's still effects. There's the experience of growing up in Scientology and the Sea organization. It imprints on you in ways that even though you can get rid of the indoctrination, it doesn't change that when certain things happen that are traumatic, which to be honest, some of it I didn't even know was traumatic because I was just so used to living in fight or flight that you don't make that connection. And I feel like it's taking me this long to get to the point where, hey, I'm ready to start talking about this again. I need to process this, and which is literally what my neurologist told me. You need to process it. And I'm like, well, there's different ways you can do that. But for me, I have a background in podcasting and I had worked in radio for a while, and I love sharing people's stories. And I think to do that, I have to share mine. And I'm finally ready to talk about it. But I think it's an ongoing thing, this idea of recovering from being in a cult, being in Scientology. I was 5 when my mom married a Scientologist. Should we start back at the beginning?
No, that's a great place to start. So you were 5. Okay.
I was 5. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I grew up on Oahu. And my mom left my dad, and she went off to make a better life for us, is what she said. And she met and married a Scientologist. And it was kind of crazy because my mom at the time was working as an exotic dancer and met a Scientologist. And his name was Brian, and he also happened to be a paraplegic. And you know what? I'm not 100% sure if they met in the actual strip club. I think that's how the story went. I wish I'd asked my mom before she passed exactly. Because I'm like, did they meet in the strip club? Because I mean, it just sounds like some kind of movie, my stripper mom, my paraplegic.
Handicapped Scientologists are pretty rare because Scientology doesn't really look look kindly upon the disabled.
Yes. Brian had gotten into a car accident when he was in his 20s due to a drunk driver. It wasn't him. He was a passenger in the car. And as a result, he was paralyzed. But he taught himself to draw. He taught himself to sculpt, and he became an incredible wood carver in Hawaii, and he was known as the wood carver. My mom meets him, and my mom's coming out of, this. My mom was a teenage bride and was pregnant with me when she was 17 in school in Hawaii. And there was substance abuse going on. So Brian, this life in Scientology had more or would look to be more stable than the life that she had been living. And so he helped her get custody of us. We ended up then living with them and started, she was doing Scientology services. When I was about 9 years old, my mom was working for the Church of Scientology in Hawaii, which was in Waikiki. If you've ever been to Oahu, it was just a couple blocks from Waikiki Beach. And she would work in the evenings and on weekends. She was, in the foundation organization because she worked during the day with my stepdad. And my sister and I were always trying to make a buck because I'm a total sugar addict. Something I'm still working on, but we wanted to make money for candy. So we thought, hey, let's draw these pictures and sell them, right? We always had a hustle going. And first we tried selling them around the org and we got in trouble. Because we were
you trying to build a business on the back of the org?
Ding, ding. Yeah. This 9-year-old and 7-year-old with their little drawings for 25 cents was a bit of a distraction. So we thought, you know what? I'm taking this to the streets. So it's 1980 in Hawaii. My sister and I go out. No one's watching us. It was typical. You hear this a lot, I think, with people who grew up in Scientology. There's no supervision. My mom was doing her thing. She was having like flashbacks on the PRF, talking to plants. I mean, she was doing the purification rundown and she was a staff member, I think, at the same time. So my sister and I draw these pictures and we go outside and we're going to sell them. And there's a security guard across the street and his name was Mark and he would buy our pictures, 25 cents, 50 cents. We could go get some bubble gum or a sucker or whatever. My mom's job at the org was she was a body router, which most people who watch your channel probably know their job is to go out and get bodies and bring them in to do a personality test. I had heard my mom's spiel for this personality test so many times that I kind of had it down. So I would tell Mark, hey, you should come over and do a personality test. And I don't recall what his reaction was about it. I just remember mostly the exchanging of money and we'd give him these pictures. One day, my mom sits us down and she's pissed. She is livid. She's like, we are not allowed to go to the org anymore. And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, really? Oh. Wasn't my favorite place to be at that time. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because of you. You and she mostly blamed me. My sister was 2 years younger. I feel like I got, it was always me. And usually, honestly, it was. And Lana just went along with it. She's like, you brought the attention of the FBI to the church and it's not okay and blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, I'm getting there. Lean in, my children, lean in. And we're like, what? And I'm 9. I'm like, what the hell is the FBI? I'm like, this is not making sense to me. Eventually it gets explained to me. As I got older, I found out more. After we left Scientology, I told her my recollection. She said, that's exactly what happened. And then she told me more. So while my sister and I are going and we're selling these photos and saying, hey, come do a personality test to our friend Mark, the security guard, it's 1980. Mark turns out to be Mark David Chapman. And weeks later, he flew to New York and he shot and he killed John Lennon. Right? I know. Crazy. This is my Scientology origin story. So what happened was the FBI was looking because if you remember, what was it, 76, 77, 78, when the church infiltrated the U.S. government and then Mary Sue Hubbard went to jail and a bunch of other people went to jail. So this was just a few years prior. So in 1980, the church was super paranoid and about they're still not about the police and unless they're paying them, bringing that attention to the church, bringing the authorities and especially the FBI, which is not something I understood when I was 9. I was just trying to support my sugar habit. So we end up being banned by the church from the church for a while. And I'm cool.
Did he have your pictures in his dossier or something? How was there any connection?
Well, as far as I was able to kind of figure out, either they got, video from these buildings, because he was a security guard outside of an apartment building and the church at the time was directly across the street. And interestingly, when I decided, I wanted to start sharing my story, I thought, oh, I should check some of this stuff. And I went on Google Maps and I looked it all up and yep, it was right across the street, just like I remembered. And it's funny, I looked up, I had never looked up Mark David Chapman before. And I looked it up and his Wikipedia talks about his love of art. I was just like, yeah, that plays. So I don't know if somebody from the church said something or they saw footage of us going back and forth. But here's the thing, Aaron, Mark David Chapman did go into the org before he went and killed John Lennon. So I'm like, did I inadvertently body route Mark David Chapman into the Church of Scientology when I was 9 years old? I don't know, maybe.
Wow.
I'll explain later. Sometimes it would come up in my, because I did do some of the OT levels and it would come up in my sec checks. So we end up, so this is going on. And so he did go in. And when he went in, he told them they were a cult. And he was kind of ranting about it. Interestingly, I found there's a video somewhere on YouTube, and I was so surprised to see a couple of the Hawaii staff members from back then talking about how he came into the org and exactly what I said. He called them a cult and la, 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 and they shoot him out of there. I was shocked that local staff members were allowed to speak to the media. And secondly, that they probably were thinking that maybe they'd get attention for Scientology through, the press of what was happening. I don't know. But so this happens and we're not allowed to go back. And then we're finally, because, they're short on people. They're not trying to ban people forever. It's not like my mom got declared or anything. So she says, okay, we can go back, but you guys need to start on course. You need to start your Scientology training. I refer to it as like, that's when we really seriously started our indoctrination. We weren't allowed to be back there on the ground unless we were actively doing services. So we go back and my sister and I start on the children's communication course, which was just a nightmare. I can remember, did you do any of those kids courses? Yes. I liked in a way, like improving communication skills was always something even growing up was kind of cool. But oh my gosh, I still to this day, it's why I have a hard time meditating. When you're sitting and you're doing these TRs, which are I don't know how much to like explain words or not while I'm telling this story, Aaron, like what people know.
You can just briefly, TR, training routines at Scientology's communication drills.
Yeah, there's these communication drills that you do, and you start off sitting there with your, you got your hands on your lap and your feet are on the ground and you're right in front of someone else doing the same. And first you start off with your eyes closed, just being there comfortably in front of each other, but you can't fall asleep. It's like, fine, whatever. Then you have to do it eyes open. And doing that with your sibling, who maybe you're pissed off with. And my mom used it as a form of torture. When we misbehave or we fought, she made us do these training routines and I freaking hated it.
Yeah.
I think once I even kicked over my sister's chair and like flipped her over, to which I got a big flunk start. Ooh, it's even triggering now. So we do this, we get going on, just our Scientology route. And from there we went and my mom, she was on staff for a little bit. She was married to my stepdad. I talked about this on my podcast recently on one of my Friday episodes. My mom ended up divorcing him and marrying his dad, who was my grandpa. Grandpa dad is kind of how we refer to him now.
Are you serious?
Yeah, totally serious.
What was your mom's name?
Donna Gale.
Donna Gale.
Donna
There's two
Gale.
Scientologists that I remember, staff members from Hawaii, and that's Scott Mitsko and Amy Suzuki. Did you know them?
Oh, yeah. Amy, for sure. She was a supervisor. Is she still in?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know for sure. I think that she is. But if I recall correctly, Amy became the senior CS and Scott Mitsko was the core soup, and they might have gotten together.
Oh. Scott, I don't exactly recall, but I remember Amy fondly. Yeah. I can remember crying. And
I think Amy was like native Hawaiian, but so are you, right? I mean, you're native Hawaiian. Yeah.
I'm a mixed bag. Yeah.
So, okay. So you're I've always wondered how Scientology managed to ever succeed in Hawaii with such a small captive audience. Maybe someone would say they've never really succeeded in Hawaii, but the fact that the organization even still exists is amazing to me.
It's a very small group and a lot of the hardcore OG people are still there from what I understand. There's not many new people coming in except the children the children of Scientologists, which I think is kind of universal. Sometimes people, I remember people would travel for work or something to Hawaii who were on services elsewhere, and they would come in. I remember one guy was doing the purification rundown. You had to be in the sauna every day. And I remember going in and I was like his sauna partner, because when he was in town, he had to do that. When my mom married my grandpa, he was still married. In fact, what happened was we're living with my stepdad, Brian, who I adored. It was probably the most stability we ever had in our childhood were those few years that my mom was living with Brian. He was great, but still life was a bit unusual. We lived in a warehouse for a while, which was nearby to where their business was, so she could kind of keep an eye on us. Which seems like an odd solution looking back. Let's just move into the warehouse 2 doors over. That way we can keep an eye on the kids while we're at work. So we move in with I'm thinking we're moving in with the only grandparents I'd known, because after my parents split, I didn't have any contact with my biological dad or that side of the family for, I think we went like over a decade. And so these were the only grandparents that I knew. So we move into the house, and one day my mom's like, "Hey, I'm gonna, we're gonna get married." So my grandpa's his name was Dick. And she's like, Dick and I are gonna get married. And I'm just like, I was I think I was 12 or so then, and pretty much was just reading a book or had my headphones on. I was 11, 12 years old, just trying to like stay as far away from the crazy as I could, because my stepdad, Dick, was pretty much, he was what Scientology would refer to. And I did, when I was at different Scientology organizations later, refer to as a squirrel, where he was using Scientology tech incorrectly. The thing is, no one in the family saw it that way. He was kind of like our own cult leader of the family. He was all about L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, but he hated the Hawaii organization. He had beef with them. So when my mom married him, we weren't really as involved with the Hawaii organization, which was kind of nice. But then we were subjected to what life was like with him. He was an alcoholic. They're getting married. My grandparents are splitting up. Despite everything that's happened, I think I am an optimist. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, at least we don't need to break in a new family. At least Christmas will be the same. Just trying to work through, process this, which I didn't process it. I just kept going. And I don't know if you can relate to this. I feel like growing up in Scientology and being in the Sea Org at such a young age, your default is survival. Your default is to survive. Your default is to get through it and you just come out the other end, whatever it takes, whatever that means, whatever that looks like.
Well, do you know who I identify with the most? Is
not my grandpa dad. I hope you're not going to say that.
Marty Bird in Ozarks.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
The entire world could be burning to the ground, and Marty's just going to go, well, what do we need to do next?
Yeah.
I identify with that character so much it's scary.
I totally get that. I think that when you grow up in Scientology and you're in the Sea Org and you come out of all that I feel like we go one of two ways. We either become extremely productive and good at what we do, or go completely the other way. Sometimes I feel like there's almost no in between. And I'm happy to share that I'm doing all right. But I had my moments of going the other way as well, in going through the whole process. After my mom married my grandpa, things got weirder. We had, when you talk about these puritanical rules, by then I was 13 and we weren't allowed to have a boyfriend. So of course I had a boyfriend, and I had never kissed a boy before. And I was meeting my boyfriend, Joseph, in the at the baseball field, in the dugout, good makeout spot, because I thought, oh, this is going to be my first kiss. So we met out there and we had this makeout session, and nothing against Joseph. He was a young kid too, but I did not even like it. I was like, this is disgusting. He put his tongue in my mouth. That's not hygienic. It's gross. I spit all the way home. I didn't let him know any of this, but I was excited to I had my first kiss at 13, but I was kind of like, at the same time, well, I don't get it. I don't get the appeal. So I go home and to Grandpa Dad's house, and I tell my cousin at the time who was living with us, she lived in California, and her mom, they were all Scientologists as well. And she rats on me to Grandpa Dad, who then puts me on a plane now remember, I'm in Hawaii. I'm on Oahu. I had only been off the island one time when we went to California the year before, which is when my mom and Grandpa Dad went off to Vegas to get married while we were in California. And then we went to Disneyland, and it was pretty much the only family vacation we ever took. But in hindsight, I'm like, I could totally see how they were trying to distract us from the fact that they're getting married, and this is bizarre. And it was like being in the Sea Org. You're seeing this train wreck, bizarre thing going on, but no one's saying anything about it. It's just, this is the way it is, because he was such a dictator within the family. He really was the leader. He had gotten through operating Thetan level 3. So he was the opinion leader in the family when it came to Scientology. Everybody who worked for him was part of the family, and also Scientologists, but they didn't really always go to the org. They were getting all their information from him. So I get sent off to Moses Lake, Washington, if you've ever been. And I'm this little Hawaiian girl with my plastic jelly bean shoes in the middle of winter. I get off I don't know why nobody was like, hey, here's a jacket. Hey, here's some shoes. It's going to be different when you get there. I was sent to go live with my mom's sister, who was not a Scientologist, and she had twin daughters who were a week younger than I was, and live with them to see how other people lived, is what I was told. It was really, I was being treated like, for some reason, I was ungrateful. And I'm like, wait. In hindsight, in looking at the time, I was like, fine, get me out of here. I would love to get out of here. But looking back, I think it was really more about, I think that Grandpa Dad knew that I, was kind of like, this is weird. This is not okay. I didn't directly challenge him, but I felt like it was really more about getting me out of the way for a little while. And I was there for 3 months, banished for 3 months to the freezing cold in the middle of nowhere, and was finally allowed to come back. And then when I came back, it was they had moved because, he had divorced my grandma, married my mom. So we had all moved into a different house. And from there, I think I was 13 by then. And I came back, and I knew that if I was going to be allowed back and be allowed to be there, that I just needed to kind of play the ass kissing game and just go along the best I could, put my head down and survive. And I started hanging out with the son of she was the executive director for the organization in Hawaii, and he was my age. His name was Bruce Perry, which a lot of you probably might know him because he went on to be what was he? I think he was the COCLO UK. He ended up all the way out there and left the Sea Org way later. So Bruce and I are hanging out. We're 13. We're just best friends. And he was more the Scientologist. I was kind of just this kind of pissed off 13, but just trying to go along with this. Everything's fine. This is completely normal. Going to school. My mom started kind of drifting back to the local Scientology org wanting to go, which created an issue with Grandpa Dad, who had beef with them. So that's kind of how I ended up being on staff for the church in Hawaii. You can legally drop out of school in Hawaii when you're 16. And as I kind of got pulled back in and hanging out with Bruce, he ended up recruiting me to be his replacement so he could go into the Sea Org in Los Angeles, which bummed me out because he was like my friend. And so he ended up going into the Sea Org, and I was to replace him. So I dropped out of school when I was 15 because when the next school year started, I would have been 16. So I dropped out of school with my mom's blessing, because there's nothing more important than serving the church and serving L. Ron Hubbard. It's like joining the priesthood or becoming a nun. It's something that your parents would be proud of for the most part. There's no value put on education, as you know, outside of Scientology. So it was not even anything that I had to beg to do. Hey, I want to drop out to join staff. And you got any questions so far? I feel like I'm just going on and on here.
No, I mean, you're really good at telling this story and what happened to you.
Okay, jump in anytime.
I'm really curious to know how you made the jump from Scientology in Hawaii to Scientology mainland.
So when Bruce recruited me to replace him, he went on, I want to say he started at AOLA, which is the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles. They deliver the upper levels in Scientology. So then I went to replace him and then got pulled into one of those training programs. Oh, we need to send somebody to be, back then it was the ethics officer, I think, but it was, the magistrate program. That's what it was called. I don't know if you remember that. So this had to have been like 83, 84. So I get sent, by then I'm 15, I dropped out of school, I'm working at the org. And they're like, we're going to send you on this training program to Los Angeles. I had never been to the PAC base or any of that before. So I'm thinking, it's kind of like going off to college, right? You get to be in a dorm, you study. How bad could it be? And again, I'm 15. There's like no parenting going on here. At that time too, my mom had gone to Clearwater, because my grandpa dad was like, well, I don't want you doing services at the church locally. I'll send you to Flag in Clearwater.
Oh, so he didn't like the Hawaii org, but he was okay with other orgs?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
that was exactly it. I never really understood what his exact beef was with the Hawaii org, but it was there. So I thought, well, my mom's leaving. I'll go do this. And I knew too, because I was going to be on staff at the org, that I couldn't live with him anyways. So it's kind of one of many times as a teen where I'm like, well, I got nowhere else to go. So I guess I'll go do this. So I go to Los Angeles and I go to the PAC base to do this training program. And I'm 15. I get to the base. It's late. I get taken up to my room. And so far, I'm still kind of like a little bit excited, like this is going to be like a college experience. It was not. I go into the berthing, into the dorm, and it's late. And someone just points up to where my bed is, of which I have to look up like 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed. One, how am I going to get up there? I don't remember if there was a ladder. So they're like, yeah, you'll be up there. And then in the morning, find this person. And I was mortified. It was gross. It was dirty. There was no bedding. I think maybe there was a blanket. I'm looking around counting. All these women are sleeping and snoring, and it stinks. And there's minimum. I always thought in my head there's like 15 of them, but no, there had to have been more, because there were probably 6 or 8 of these bunk beds, 3 high. And these are Sea Org members at that. I don't know how they do it now, but at that time, if you went for training in Los Angeles, you were put into the same berthing of where the Sea Org members are. There's one bathroom. And again, there's like 15, 20 women. There was another bathroom and shower if you went to the main building. There were showers in there, so we would go there. I just cry in that bunk bed that night, because I'm like, this is not at all what I expected, what I was led to believe it would be. It was just gross, nasty, and disgusting. And I was super lonely. And I wasn't even there 24 hours yet. I start the training program, which, that goes along. I love learning still to this day. So I actually liked studying and learning things. But I'm doing what's called this magistrate program, which is to train me to be an ethics officer in Scientology, which is a person who handles people's ethics. And in Scientology, it doesn't matter what your age is. So forget the fact that I'm 15. As part of my training, I'm still sitting there across the table from some dude in his 30s, having to handle him on the fact that he's masturbating because it came up in a session and he shouldn't have been doing that, because we're all on course and we're all training and you're getting auditing and all that stuff. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to talk about the weird obsession with not masturbating in Scientology.
Yeah. And it's funny, on my channel, I've spoken a lot about this idea of kids being trained as auditors, but I haven't spoken as much about kids being made into ethics officers.
Yeah.
And even my teenage stepsister, teenager at the time, went to flag for this magistrate training and fired back as an ethics officer for the entire Philadelphia org, the only org in all of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And she's expected to handle the ethics, which always includes sexual stuff, of every Scientologist there. It's really disturbing.
Yeah, it is. And to go through, we talked about the training routines that you do. You're sitting there with your eyes open then. And as you get out of the kid stage and you're doing the real courses, you're doing it for 2 hours at a shot. And if you blink too much or you twitch or you itch or you yawn or whatever, fart, I bet they'd flunk you for it. I never did while doing them, so I don't know what actually would happen, but I bet it would be flunk, start.
It depends on if you lean to the side or not.
If you stayed perfectly still, pass it off as if it's someone else's. So in doing this training, I was doing, the major level training courses. So you're doing this for 2 hours. And then you're going over and you're doing bull baiting, which is basically to flatten any buttons that you might have. And by doing it, the coach, the person, I'm the student, and the coach can say anything to me, just can't touch me. And knowing that, I'm going into the training program as a magistrate, I mean, it was just like I had no idea about a lot of this sexual stuff. I was still a virgin. Remember, I had just kissed a boy and got sent out of the state. And the things that would come up, it was like, and then at the same time, you're in Scientology, you're not supposed to have any misunderstood words. And having to clarify, or at least later, because you don't want to have a misunderstood word somebody used even while they're doing that, was just, some of it you couldn't, because where are you going to look it up? A lot of it was slang. And to get me to where they referred to it as being flat on something. You don't have any buttons. If they push the button, you will have no reaction to it. And that, I believe, that type of indoctrination, that's something I would say probably one of the biggest things I've worked to undo is to develop buttons again. Because I lack boundaries. I'm an oversharer. I might not be uncomfortable talking about something, but sometimes I will not realize that the person I'm talking to might be uncomfortable about it because I don't have a button on it. It just really messes with your head and these lines of what is appropriate. And it layers one on top of the other every time you do it and you go through it and you get these buttons flattened to where you realize, and again, remember, we're teenagers. So it's those formative years where you're figuring out who you are, you're figuring out, what your boundaries are. And you're in this situation where you're being trained to, in essence, tolerate the most disgusting, vile things being said to you and not react to it. And you start learning, at least this was you tell me, Erin, this was my takeaway from it, was like, you start learning that you really shouldn't, you just don't react to almost anything. You don't have an appropriate reaction. And that still today, sometimes I joke with my partner, I've been with him for about 10 years now. He's never been in Scientology. And my Scientology is showing, my Seorg is showing. I will lack a reaction or respond in a way that's totally inappropriate, even though I've done a lot of work on learning compassion and empathy. And it's part of what I do with the podcast and sharing community and sharing connection, because I'm amazed at all the good that's out there in the world. There are so many good people. And that's something that when we talk about going through these experiences and how they impact you growing up, I think it's important for people to understand, whether you're in or you've never been in, that I think each of us deal with it our own way. we heal and we figure out who we are, and we evolve in ways in a different way. And one of my biggest realizations in leaving and being far enough away is that I need to let people heal or respond in their way. And it's okay, because I can have what I believe to be true, what I hold to be true, or my viewpoint, and you can have yours. And if it's different, that's okay, because I have mine and you have yours, and both can exist at the same time.
You know, there's something you just said that I think made something click for me as to why I feel I get defensive at the idea that people will throw out there of, where are you at on your road to recovery?
Mm.
And every time I hear that, I can't help but, at least in my mind, get extremely defensive, if not a little angry. And here's what you said. Okay. In Scientology, the whole paradigm is, there's something wrong with you, we're going to make you better.
Yeah.
Or you just said, you get to the point where you learn not to react. And I was about to say to you, yes, it's a virtue. That's considered the right way to be. The right way to be is that you will not react to anything anyone says or does. And that's considered the right way to be.
Yeah.
And if you are someone who does react, that's the wrong way to be. And in order to even have this conversation, it's predicated on the idea that there is a right way to be.
Yeah.
And the idea that there's a normal that people should aspire to. There's a baseline that if you're above it, you're great. And if you're below it, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
That's an idea I kind of wholesale reject. I mean, I understand. I'm speaking in generalities here, but okay. So now let's take the flip side. You leave Scientology.
I leave
any
Scientology.
high control group. Well, no. Well, I'm saying, so you have the flip side of it, where now you leave and people go, oh, there's things about you now that are wrong because you were in Scientology, and you need to work to recover and improve those things. And I go, first of all, what a holier than thou way of thinking. Like, if we're all damaged in some way, who are you to say which damage is okay and which damage is not okay? What if I'm okay with the ways in which I'm damaged?
Yeah. Yeah.
What if I'm okay with those things getting better over time? But what if I'm okay with the ways in which I'm damaged? And who the hell are you to tell people, oh, you've made so much progress in your recovery? Oh, you mean being more like you? So you mean because I'm in Scientology, I'm this way, but I should work to be more like you.
Yeah.
And when I say you, I'm not talking about a specific person. I'm talking about in general, people are like, recovery. I'm not shitting on the idea of recovery. What I am shitting on is anyone who thinks that they are in a position to tell someone else the things they should be working to change about themselves. Everybody have things about themselves that other people wish would change. I'm kind of monologuing here. What are your feelings on this? This idea of, well, anything I just said.
Yeah, I believe, and in my experience, and when I've met people outside of Scientology and I got to know, quote, the real world, I feel like most people have their own cult. Mine happened to be a legitimate cult, but they have addiction in the family, a controlling relationship, a controlling family, another high control organization. But the idea is you become indoctrinated that there's one way to believe, you believe that one way, and that's used as a way to control you. That's kind of like my guideline. So when I was looking to, I feel like we swing, we're so far one way in Scientology. There's an extreme, especially growing up in Scientology and being in the Sea Org. Your demeanor, the way you present yourself, the non-reaction, the robotness is that, that is like the norm. And then you leave all of that and you're exposed to all kinds of different emotions. And there's some emotion in the Sea Org, but it is so severely penalized that you don't dare. You don't even want to let somebody know if you're sick, because you're going to get in trouble. I knew a guy once who got mugged on Hollywood Boulevard. And you know what happened? He got COMEV'd, which is a committee of evidence, which is like this justice action taking on you that you pulled this in. They have a very twisted.
It's kind of like a court martial, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in coming out or leaving Scientology and figuring these things out, you're right. there's really no, my biggest realization about it is there's no one way. There's no one way to think. There's no one way to act. I am nobody's shining example of anything. The only thing I will cop to is being a really good cautionary tale for a few things, but I'm just trying to do my own thing too and figure it out. And it's taken me a long time, not just post Scientology, but I've met many, many people that that have become friends, and I've looked at their struggles, and interestingly, they're similar, and they were never in a cult, but struggling with this idea of identity. And you know what I really think it is, Aaron? It's judgment. It's judgment. It's human nature to judge the crap out of each other, to judge each other on these actions. And when you're judging, you're pretty much saying like, well, I don't do that. You know what I came to learn? Most people are freaks. And fine, power to you. Fly your freak flag, whatever. But what ends up happening is I feel like a lot of times in society, we just kind of do what we did in Scientology. It's an extreme. It is next level. You are this virtuous. And to be honest, like I didn't do much in my teen years. You know, most of us, it's like you get in so much trouble for it that it's just hardly worth it. I didn't do drugs. I didn't try marijuana until I was like 40. It's just, there's just a lot that you don't do. And then you leave and then you go crazy for a little while. But it's this idea of, for me, it was letting go of judgment. It's whether you're in Scientology or you're out of Scientology, the magic, you do you and let other people do them. And if they don't agree with you or they have this opinion about you, everybody has one, right? Just like assholes. Everybody has one. Everybody's going to have an opinion. And I think when we can be okay with who we are and our flaws, and I know when I mess up, I know when I say something that, you know, afterwards I'm like, okay, that was probably inappropriate. I don't always know, but I'm learning. I walked into a meeting the other day. This is the kind of stuff that's still like, I'm like, read the room, Natalie, read the room. And I have this, you know, tendinitis going on, and they're like, what happened? And I just immediately blurt out, oh, I have a chronic masturbation problem. And which for the record, I do not, but there would be nothing wrong with it if I did. But that's the thing where you don't have a button on it. You don't have a button on it. It was my poor coworkers who I work with. It's like when you don't have a filter, and it's probably what made me good in radio because I had no filter. My coworkers, I would talk about this butt rash that I had. I didn't know it was inappropriate for the workplace because even though I'd been out for 13 years, I pretty much had been self-employed. I didn't really work with a bunch of other people and like I do now. So I'm still always learning. And you know what? They still love me. They laugh. They're okay with it. It's like they accept me. I accept them. And I think leaving and coming out of whatever high control, whatever your personal cult is, Scientology or whatever, letting go of the judgment, it's an exercise. It's like it's something I constantly have to work on because I fall right back into that too. But the freedom in that is that you realize like it's okay if somebody thinks that I'm this or I'm that and I don't feel that I am. That's okay. Because it doesn't change. I'm over here like living my best life. You know, I'm working through my own stuff and they are too. They are too. And I try to remember that with a lot of ex-Scientologists too. Everybody's working through their own stuff and they're going to do it in different ways. And we are just broken ass pieces. Even people never in Scientology figuring it out.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll even go so far as to say I've been specifically asked by some people if I could do a chat with them about the subject of recovering after leaving Scientology, and my answer has been nope. Mm-hmm. And I go, I'm not even going to do anything. I don't want to do anything that's going to look like some kind of virtue signaling, trying to define what path you have to follow in order to be a good recovering Scientologist. Or if you fall short of it, you're not a good recovering Scientologist. And it's funny because it'll sound like I'm against recovery. What I'm against is trying to shame people for whether they have or have not done the things you think they should or should not have done. Because, even though many people will say your videos have helped me so much in my road to recovery, and I go, great. I mean, for me, talking about things publicly is probably what someone would say is my recovery. But honestly, I feel like a hypocrite even saying those words, because I go, I'm not doing this for recovery. I'm doing this to be David Miscavige's worst nightmare. I'm doing this to clog the first page of Google results on Scientology. I'm doing this to show people they don't have to be afraid of Scientology. I'm doing this as a big FU to everyone who refused to not destroy my family. I'm doing this for all sorts of reasons. Recovery is not one of them. And yet, I'm not against recovery, because you go, but what is recovery? Recovery is different for every single individual. And I'm like, who else had a great recipe for recovery? L. Ron Hubbard. I don't know. I sound so cynical and jaded, don't I?
It's all part of your process. You just got to work on that recovery, Aaron.
And maybe I just have a button on the word, because there's certainly things I've said that have been keystones to what someone else would say, oh, that's your recovery. And one of them was reading the book, Steve Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, where I realized I was really holding on to the fact that even though I no longer believed in Scientology and Scientology was a destructive cult, I'm like, but it sure was unique though, wasn't it? We sure were involved in something special there, weren't we? And I read Steve Hassan's book and his experience with the Moonies, and I was like, I was sobbing uncontrollably listening to this book. And it was dawning on me, I didn't realize how much I was holding on to the fact that I still thought Scientology was a special kind of bullshit. And I was having to confront the fact of like, oh my God, it was garden variety bullshit. We fell for garden variety bullshit. And it was devastating for me. And it was also, you would say it was a big step in my road to recovery, even though I don't like that word.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I think it's a huge part of, anytime you're, and like I said, for me, talking about it helps me process. That's kind of like the word I think that I use, because for me, that's how it feels. I did not know that so much of what happened to me growing up in Scientology and being in the Sea Org and being on staff, that it was traumatic. I mean, I knew I didn't like it, but it's when your entire existence, you were stuck in fight or flight, you're kept there. That's all you know. So if things start seeming kind of like almost okay or not stressful, you're like, oh my gosh, like what is this? It's for me, it's been coming out of that and realizing that I don't need to be in fight or flight. It caused a lot of issues. I mean, physically, when I talk about my neurologist, I had 5 years ago, I had gotten Lyme disease. I lost my ability to walk. I couldn't walk for a while. I lost my sense of smell. This was way pre-COVID. I had all these neurological symptoms. It was a whole thing. And I saw multiple doctors. I slowly got better and got better. And it's only been the last year, not even almost a year. It'll be a year in January where I've not needed to use a cane. And I went from doctor to doctor, and I had gotten a new primary physician, and she was fantastic. I was getting muscle spasms all up my body and my legs that were so strong that when they did blood work, they said, your spasms are so strong, they're breaking down your muscles on a cellular level. Wow. And I would get MRI after MRI because they thought maybe I was going down the MS path, but I didn't. So there was no hard wiring that they could find to explain what was happening to me. And so they sent me to the University of Minnesota, and I saw 2 different neurologists. And what it came down to is they're like, we understand this today. A couple of years ago, we didn't even understand it, but they call it functional neurology, where it's not a hardwire issue with your brain. It's a soft wire issue. Your brain has rewired in ways that is causing your brain and your nervous system to not properly communicate. And when you're faced with some type of major stress, which is when fight or flight kicks in, you need your brain and your nervous system to work together. It goes into overdrive. And for me, it manifested in my whole body. I forgot what it was called, but like these non-brain seizures, like I would be alert and know what was happening, the muscle spasms, all that. So I worked with them and what their solution was for it. And it was way more simpler than I thought. But for me, a lot of that was reframing for me where I went, because this is funny. They said, they're like, this is what we think it is. And then they go, but here's the thing. We usually see this in veterans who've done multiple tours of duty. Were you in the military? I'm like, no. And I it's not something I wanted to get into. I was still like, I don't even know where to start with this. So I was kind of just playing stupid in there. And you could tell they were kind of confused. And I'm like,
you were like,
I
does
was
the
raised
Space
in
Navy count?
Yeah. I'm like, I was raised in a cult, all this stuff went on, blah, 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 blah. It was Scientology. And as soon as I said Scientology, they were like, oh, okay. And what they said, though, they said, we now know that you can rewire a brain again, that with neuroplasticity, you can change it. You can get your brain and your nervous system back in alignment. I was doing the wrong type of physical therapy. I needed neurological physical therapy. I needed therapy. They told me about cognitive behavioral therapy. And to be honest, my insurance wasn't that great. So I went on YouTube and I started following this chick, Therapy in a Nutshell. And she talked about this cognitive behavioral therapy. And I started just thinking with it and using it as a tool. And it resonated with me. I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. And I started to get better. It was like the cane less and less. And like I said, I'm like 9-10 months now where I don't need it. I'm like, I just started walking to work out, because if I do something really physical, I'll still get some muscle spasms, but nothing like what they were. Wow. And this really, for me, after coming out of this and realizing like, holy shit, can I don't know if I should swear or not. Holy crap.
Yeah, you can curse. You can curse.
Okay. This rewired my brain. It rewired my brain to the point where my brain and my nervous system weren't functioning properly. And I had two ways to go in that moment. Either go down the rabbit hole of this will continue to, because I did have another doctor tell me, you'll just continue to get worse. And I didn't accept that. Or take some steps to try to get my brain to wire back in a way that works for me, that doesn't have my body react that way to stress in these situations. And that's something I've been working on. And through all of that, and that's why I think I'm kind of, after 13 years, or maybe it's been 10 years, maybe 7 years since I've really publicly said anything about Scientology, where I'm ready to talk about it, because I want to process it with how I see the world today. I want to look at it. I want to talk about it. I want to see it. I want to take it apart with the point of view that I have today, and the more peace that I have today as well, and process that. And there's so much, like I said, I started making a list, because I was just like, I thought when I would look at my past that there were periods of time when it was crazy. And when I sat down and I actually made the list, it was constant. It was my mom marries my grandpa. It just went, and then going to LA for the training, and then coming back, and all of these things. It just was one after the other, after the other, after the other. And being in the Sea Org, my leaving the Sea Org story is bizarre. It's criminal. It's something that I've never talked about. And I'm just debating right now if I want to get into it. I'll get it. You know what?
I mean, we don't feel any pressure to cover everything now. We can do 100 videos. We can do 100 chats. So we should do a ton of collaborations and stuff like that. But like, okay, so when you went to that magistrate training, you were like, what, 15 years old? How long
15.
were you on that training program?
I was there for about a year. And while I was there, my sister, who was 13, 14 at the time, it was during the Wallersheim trial in LA. Not one dime for Wallersheim. We all got pulled off course. Not one thin dime for Wallersheim. I still remember the picket. We were pulled off course, which this is huge. It's like never happened any other time where you're taking out of the course room, because they needed bodies at the courthouse to protest during this trial. So for part of it, we would study, and then we would go to the courthouse. Well, my sister Lana ended up coming to LA for the crusade, because then it was called a crusade. It was a whole thing. Were you around then?
No, I was born in 1980.
Ooh. Way to make a girl feel old.
I know I look like I'm 55, but no.
Yeah, so this was back in the day, young one. It was, when was that? 86? Yeah, because it wasn't that the year LRH died too. I
LRH
would have been
died in
16.
86, yeah.
Yeah, so it would have been around there. My sister comes to LA. We're being pulled off a course to do this whole crusade and all that stuff. And at some point, I end up going back to Hawaii. My sister's there doing the crusade. She ends up going back to Hawaii. And for the life of me right now, I can't remember why I went back. I don't think I finished the training. I don't think I was kicked out either. I just, for whatever reason, I go back. And life was just chaotic. And for me at that time, I'm 16. I'd gone through this experience in LA. I didn't feel good about it. It felt gross, especially all this emphasis. There's such an emphasis in the Sea Org and Scientology on sex. Sea Org members, as you guys all probably know, if you're not married, you can't have sex. There's no heavy petting. There's, while I was on training, by the way, I was engaged. I did meet someone. His name was, and I don't know if he's still in or not. He was from the UK. His name was Paul.
Oh, but you got engaged to someone that was on the training program.
Yes. Which
you guys didn't get in trouble for that?
Oh no, we got in trouble for it. Okay. And and I was so naive, and I just thought like, oh, well, I'll go back to Hawaii and I'll replace myself and then I'll join him wherever. Just like so ridiculous. And again, because in the Sea Org, you don't date, you get married. And Paul and I would sneak off here and there, which is what I ended up getting in trouble for. He got in trouble because he was a Sea Org member. I was a staff member, but he was a Sea Org member there training. Yeah.
That has to be why you got sent away, though.
That's probably, maybe I did get kicked out that time.
Yeah.
There were a few times I may have been asked to leave. So the engagement,
amazing. All of these training programs end up that exact same way. People from all over the world meet and they fall in love and they do some stuff that they get kicked out for over and over and over again.
It's the only way to leave. It's the only way to leave, to blow or get busted out of there. I mean, you kind of learn that at some point, and which will kind of set the tone for when I joined the Sea Org. So I go back to Hawaii, and I remember then thinking like I still was going to be with him and I was going to get myself replaced, and none of that happened. It was just, I ended up having some health issues. I had nobody. My mom was in Florida then. My sister joined the Sea Org then at 14. She was recruited by Jonathan Glassford. I don't know if any of you know him. He's now not in the Sea Org. He blew. But he was a recruiter, recruited my sister, was supposed to be her guardian. It's typical story. Oh no, they'll have a guardian. She'll be in school. None of that happened. And interestingly, on Fridays, when I share my Scientology story on Tonka Talk, my sister just started joining me. She has never spoken about this.
Really?
I'm 53, so she's 51 now. She actually left Scientology extremely quietly when she was maybe 19, 20.
Wow.
And so she just never said anything about it, so it didn't create situations with us, because my mom was a very active Scientologist. Even after I left the Sea Org, I still was. But she's starting to talk about it. And this current therapy she's actually doing, I think, is what's really helping. And so she was just sharing the story of how she, there was no guardian. She was put in the same kind of nasty ass dorm with these beds 3 high. And so I'm back in Hawaii, and it's just me. I'm living at my not grandpa dad's, because I can't be a staff member and be chilling at his place because he's got beef with the org in Hawaii. I was living with my first stepdad, Brian, for a little while. And then for a time, I actually was staying with my biological grandma. And I was just kind of floating around. There was a period where I wasn't going into the org. I was around 16. I was hanging out with some friends who were in Scientology, but they were older. So I was doing a lot of drinking, a lot of drinking. That's about all the partying I did, because I didn't do any drugs back then. Not that I'm doing a bunch of drugs now. But I ended up then becoming a nanny for a family of Scientologists, and they had some twins, and they're like, would you come be our nanny? And that kind of got me back into the fold. And at that point, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be back on staff in the org, which is where they kept wanting me to be because I had signed a contract. You signed a 2.5-year or a 5-year contract, which is mandatory, despite the fact that you are a volunteer, and that's why they don't need to pay you. So I'm like, fine, I do the nanny gig, and they pretty much recover me back into, into the org and into Scientology. And I'm just like, man, what am I going to do? Like I was living with them. Then I had someplace to live. When I was on staff, when I went back, I was like just couch surfing. I was 16, supporting myself, doing odd jobs, and then, working at the org some. So I decided, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to LA. By then my mom was there. She went from Florida to LA, and my sister was there in the Sea Org. I'm like, I'm just going to join the Sea Org. Nowhere else to go. So why not? When I was on the training program, I had to do where all my work study people at. If you were ever on the study program and your org didn't pay for your room and board, you had to do work study. So you studied in the course room, and then you spent, I don't remember if it was 5 hours or whatever, working in the dining room. Usually that was my case. So I was working in the dining room when I was training, and I was working with Pack-Based Crew, which was the estate organization. So that's who I knew in the Sea Org. And I loved those guys because they were just a bunch of misfits and pirates. Everybody in that organization was busted into it. They were somewhere else busted, and that's where you got sent.
Yeah, nobody joins the Sea Org and joins Pack-Based Crew.
I did.
Well,
I think I'm the only person to ever do it.
Oh, but because you knew when you were on work study.
Yeah, I was on work study. But then when I went back, I mean, I knew how the Sea Org worked. I understood that. I knew there were different organizations. I was, I could have done a lot of things, but, I was kind of like lazy.
I did the work study thing when I was at Flag. I never did work study at PAC because I never trained at PAC as an out-of-org trainee. But at Flag, we did the work study. And honestly, it was kind of a nice break from all this studying to do all that working. We're working in the laundry rooms in the hotels. We're working in construction. We're moving rooms, HVAC. Anyway, it was child labor, but from our perspective, it was kind of fun.
100%. Using tools you got no business touching. No, I worked in the dining room. And so that's what I had done on work study. So then I leave Hawaii and I go back to LA, like I'm going to join the Sea Org. And meanwhile, like senior HCO West US, so the senior Hubbard Kunimake, the people who are in charge of the hiring and the moving of staff all over the place were like, no, you were not going in the Sea Org. You need to go back to Hawaii and get back on post. You were supposed to replace Bruce Perry. And I'm like, no, man, because I'm a minor and my mom's here and I have no one there. And, we don't want there to be an incident. Like we don't want, people finding out.
So your mom and your sister are in LA and they're trying to send you from LA back to Hawaii.
Yeah. Yep. When I was like, 16, headed towards 17 at that point. I had gotten myself on a plane and I'm like, no, I'm going to go join the Sea Org. I actually so I went to, the people I work study with. I'm like, hey, I'm going to join the Sea Org. I'm going to join you guys. And I think even they were like, huh, what? Because again, nobody joins this organization. You're busted into it. But I was looking around going, these are my people. And even though they were the busted people and the misfits, there was a sense of camaraderie and loyalty there, not with all of them. But with a lot of them, it was the last place I was where I felt like I actually had a group. I got promoted out of there, unfortunately, but it was the last space. Shane Woodruff was the CO back then, the commanding officer.
Of the Estates Org?
Yeah. He had been busted for something because now he's doing something else.
Wow.
Yeah. Shane Woodruff.
Who are some other people you remember from that time?
Well, let's see. There was Shane Woodruff. There was Paul, we called him Tattoo. He had all these tattoos. Was his last name Smith? I don't know. I don't recall exactly. But he was married to Maggie. I know Maggie's out now. Maggie Smith.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure. Okay. I'm pretty sure she was married to Paul. I met my first husband there, Dan Lafreniere. His brother Marty Lafreniere was there also at PBC at the Estates Org. There was after Shane, I think ended up going somewhere else. And Ian, did you see the movie Ratatouille? Like that,
Yes.
he always reminded me of that. Rat. Shane Woodruff was your student. So
If
Ian
anyone
takes
ever
over.
needs evidence that Scientology really is as small as we say it is, it's
Oh,
just
yeah.
the fact that everyone you hear from knows each other.
Yeah. It's 6 degrees of separation. Very, very easy. So
Yeah.
Shane was there. Then Ian took over for a while. And I just talked to my sister about this, and we're actually about to drop that episode tomorrow. She told me something about Ian, who was the commanding officer at the time. And what we were talking about was how inappropriate he was. He made us feel gross. We're teenage girls. My sister was even younger than me. And just the looks, the comments, the hand on you too long. And there's no one to share this with, because you're indoctrinated again to believe that if you're getting that kind of attention, you did something to pull that in. You must have some responsibility in it because you're this immortal being, even though you're in this teenage body. There was a fair amount of that going on where it was, outright sexual harassment. But back then we didn't know what to call it. Just made us uncomfortable. But, depending on who's sexually harassing you, if you bring it up and there's somebody who is senior to you, especially, or somebody who, is in the good graces at that moment, then you're the one who's going to get in trouble, not him. So I'm going along. I get myself on the estates project force, and I'm like, I'm just ignoring the senior people telling me from the Continental Liaison Office, get your ass back to Hawaii. I'm like, nah. Because I'm like, I'm going to be a SEERG member. I'm on the estates project force. I get pulled off. They're like, they went and got me, and we're like, she is not to be on the EPF. She needs to go back to Hawaii and replace herself. And again, I'm like, dude, I'm 16. I don't know what who's going to pay for this ticket? Where am I going to live? All this stuff. So I decide that I'm going to do my own EPF. So I get to work back in the dining room where I was before. And then on my study time, I do the courses for the estates project force.
Wow.
The irony is I fought to leave the Sea Org, yet I fought so hard to get in. And probably, again, the only person to join that organization outright. So eventually I put the seniors at the Continental Liaison Office just go into apathy about it. They just give up. They know and honestly, I had a legit case because I was a minor. My mom was there. My mom was not in the Sea Org because she had done LSD. Which if you do LSD, you cannot be in the Sea Org, which is why when she was on the purification rundown in Hawaii, she was talking to plants. She said she was having some flashbacks. So it was legitimately, and then my mom had my back on that. She's like, yeah, she's not going. I'm not sending my child back to where, nobody is. So I get through my courses and boom, I am a Sea Org member and I'm going about my business. And I'm like, all right, it's, I was about 17 then. I did not want to stay in a dorm. So I started looking for a husband. And I met Dan, and, you don't date in the Sea Org, you get married. So I think we spent maybe a couple lunches together. And I don't know so when you were in LA, you might've known his brother, Marty Lafreniere.
So I don't know who that is. The name is familiar, but I feel like I'm getting it conflated with another name.
Marty's got or at least back then, he had red hair. They're both really tall.
By the time I got to PAC, it was 2002.
Okay, yeah, we were all gone by then. That's right. I forget. I keep forgetting you're a baby. That's right.
And plus, there's someone over at the Celebrity Center who also had a French-sounding name that I know I'm getting it conflated with.
Yeah,
so
Marty might have been there. He might have been there at one point, but then he ended up marrying Jody
Leclerc. I'm getting it confused with Leclerc.
Oh,
so yeah,
okay.
I never knew any Lafrenières.
Yeah. So we get married, we get a room instead of a dorm. We have to share a bathroom with another couple. It was in Lebanon Hall, which was, within the blue buildings.
I had a room in Leb Hall because my wife was in CMO.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just
By
they
the
were
time
all
I
kind
got
of
there,
pieces of crap.
Leb Hall was like CMO and RTC and senior HCO and stuff.
Really? Did they renovate it?
Yeah, it was still shitty, but it was
Yeah.
just separate from the main building. They didn't want them fraternizing with the main building riffraff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we can't have that. We cannot have, upper management people sharing ass heat on a toilet with some low life like me.
Yeah.
Might be catchy. So we ended up, Dan and I get married, and I'm working away I'm still in the galley, because pretty much I was like, hey, the lead steward, his name was George something. He was an African American man who kind of like he was a little bit of a father figure for me. Kind of took me under his wing, and I'm like, you recruited me, which means I work for you. Like a genie you find, and so I'm like, I'll work for you. And he was like, yeah, okay. So I became a steward in the dining room. And honestly, I loved that job, because people would come through the line, and our statistic was people would vote on the service. They would vote on their meals. And so it was back when the cadet org was around too, and they would do missions. So they would come and clear plates and all that, and they'd make a little bit of money that we were supposed to pay them. I'm not sure if we actually did. And we would do these skits and songs to encourage people to vote. I mean, so I was okay with it. I wasn't doing any of these like all-nighters. My sister always says, she's like, you got away with more stuff than anybody I know in the Sea Org at that time. So because I was at this lower level org doing this low level post. And so and still today, my point of view is, whatever my job is, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to be the best at it. I'm going to do a good job. So I just embraced it. It was physical work. I got in shape. I got to see all the different Sea Org members that would come through the dining rooms. And back then, and I don't know if it's still this way, they were separated. You had the main crew dining room, and then you had the CMO dining room, and they had a steward. Yeah. And their steward, I forget his name, but he was weird as hell. Just like, I don't know how he was allowed to walk around with just like, it just was this giant cloud over him all the time.
Let me ask you this, if it was this way when you were there, and this is when I realized, actually looking back on it, this should have been a sign that something was very wrong with the entire structure of Scientology.
Yeah.
There was the dining room for the main Sea Org members. There was the separate dining room for the CMO. Yeah. And then there was an even more exclusive private dining room just for the IAS.
Oh, the IAS?
Yes.
Oh, that's different. No, in my day, young one, it was the crew dining room, the CMO dining room. And he had like a little cooktop in there. So sometimes we would go in there and make eggs and stuff. And then there was the RTC dining room, the INT and the RTC dining room. So INT management, but like RTC specifically had kind of this space in the back. And that's where, like, when Guillaume would come and like the INT exec and the RTC execs were there, they would be in that dining room. And they were always served by my boss, George. But sometimes I would be allowed in. You weren't even allowed to be around these people if you looked or acted like some crazy psycho, or they thought you were out ethics. That's why I never understood why the CMO guy was allowed to be in there.
I'm dying to know who this George guy is. If there's anyone in the live chat who knows George's last name.
He's African American. He's passed. His wife's name was Sonia. And again, this was 1980. I was probably 1985 or 86 when I met George, 87 or so when I went into the Sea Org. I remember because they lived in an apartment off the base. So sometimes he would let me, because again, with my job, once I cleaned everything up in the dining room and all that, it was like I didn't have to stay so late, but I had to start so early because of breakfast. But I would go over to his apartment, and they had a little television, and I would watch television. That's where people, yes, the WDC and all the CMO would eat. You are right, Blow Drill. That is right. That is right.
The Blow Drill is Dylan. He used to work up at CST. Do you know Dylan? Dylan Gill?
Oh, his name sounds familiar. He worked at CST. Does Dylan?
Well, I mean, you might have known him from Facebook for the last 10 years or whatever, but you might not have actually known him in the Sea Org. But that's.
I wonder if he knows Nicole Lafreniere. She was my sister-in-law, and I think she's still at CST, or she was. No one has seen her in a really long time.
Nicole How do you say Lafreniere?
Lafreniere, Lafreniere, just depending on who you are. But I know she got married, so she probably has a different last name now.
I'll
I
keep my eye
always.
on the live chat to see if anyone. Oh,
You
yeah,
do
Dylan
know
knows
her.
me.
Is she? When's the last time you saw her? Is she okay? Well, I don't know if we're going to have this conversation like this, but think about it. Worked with her for years. Yeah, I really liked Nicole. She came when Dan and I got married. She came down for the wedding. So I'm working in this dining room, and sometimes, like I said, I would be allowed to go in and serve the RTC and the WDC people and all that. But you really had to be. I remember one time when I had a junior. This one I was when you knew her ex-husband with that name. Oh, okay, cool.
No, he
I
knew
had a.
your ex-husband.
Oh, you knew my ex-husband. Oh, okay, Dan. I was married to Dan, and Dan's brother is Marty. And Dan's been out for years, but quietly.
Not
Pretty much
anymore.
so. Yeah. I know. Well, people know because
you don't
Dan
mean
helped me
secretly. You just mean quietly.
quietly. Yeah, not
Okay.
secretly, quietly, because he helped get our daughter out of Flag once, a few years
Oh,
ago.
wow.
I'll tell you that later. So we ended up, I'm working in the dining room. Dan and I are married at this point, and one day, oh no, I was saying something else. I had this junior, his name was Paul, and he was another one like cloud over his head, just like this little troll of a man. And this is when later I was working at the Continental Liaison Office, and he gets on the elevator with like Norman Starkey, some other like way up there dude, and some other way up there dude. And he gets on there and he's completely what's called bad indicators. So he just looks depressed. He's just got this real negative energy. And you do not do that around the space of these people because you will get in trouble for it. And he did. He ended up being security checked, and they ended up, I think, offloading him because I think it was Guillaume, who was the executive director international at the time, asked him, "How are you doing?" And he answered honestly, "Oh, not too great." So he starts being security checked, and they get rid of him. So I'm working in the dining room, and I start getting these really bad cramps, and I'm thinking, well, it must be my period, and except it's so heavy, like I'm majorly bleeding, and I don't know what's going on. And I go downstairs to see George. God, I wish I'll remember his name at 3 a.m. and I will text you. George, married to Sonia. Anyways, I go down to George and I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I can't be in the dining room right now. Like I am bleeding heavily. And I went into the bathroom that was downstairs by the galley where the kitchen was. And I was having a miscarriage, and I didn't
Oh, my
know.
goodness.
I didn't even know that I was pregnant. And this was after the rule came out that if you get pregnant, you need to go to a failing organization, or they coerce you into having an abortion. So I'm having this miscarriage, which I'm not even sure what it is. I'm in just tremendous pain. The only doctor that we're allowed to go to was, when he was alive back then, was Dr. Dank, who was L. Ron Hubbard's doctor, and he was down at the whatever clinic it was, a mile or two down the road. I forgot what
Was it
called.
Shaw? Shaw's
Yeah,
Health?
Shaw Health Center. So George tells me I need to, I should go there. I think he knew what was happening. I didn't even know because I was feral. No one ever sat me down and was like, I mean, obviously I knew how babies were made, but I didn't understand a lot of the mechanics or even that this was a miscarriage. I didn't know that that's what was happening. I just knew I was in a tremendous amount of pain and had heavy, heavy bleeding. So I walk to Shaw Health Center while having a miscarriage. It was a mile or two down the road. And I go see Dr. Dank, and he explains to me what's happening. And then he puts me on birth control. And it was birth control pills. And fortunately, I didn't get any kind of trouble for that, for having been pregnant, because I didn't know I was pregnant. And I didn't know a lot about birth control. I didn't know at that time. And by then I'm 17. I got married when I was 17. So this might have happened right before I turned 18. I still didn't quite understand timing and when you could get pregnant and all that. And I wasn't on any birth control. So they put me on birth control pills. And at that point, I they were going to, I was being traded and sent to the Continental Liaison Office. And I was super bummed about that. Because even though this was the lowest of the low organization you could be in my eyes, compared to everything I'd seen, this seemed like the only true kind of group. They worked together. They had fun together. There was like this Shane at the time. It was like I respected him as a commanding officer because he kind of really kept the team together. Things weren't so heavy with ethics and stuff. You kind of expected that people were like a little, that was kind of like part of the brand. If you're at the states org, you've been busted there. You're just a bunch of ethics particles, as they used to call us. So I end up having to go to the Continental Liaison Office org, which is middle management. It's basically like it's the Dunder Mifflin of the Sea Org. It's that middle management kind of thing. And I ended up working in Treasury. And my senior at the time, I think I might have been replacing her. And then she was being, often you get traded, so you get promoted so someone else can be promoted. And I looked really good on paper. So I would when I would do my tests and these different things, and it's like on paper, I looked like I really had it together. I was executive material, or at least Dunder Mifflin level executive material. So I ended up working in Treasury. I'm a high school dropout. Okay. When I finally did go get my GED at 40 after I left the cult, I had to take a math class. I had to go to GED school. To this day, but in the Sea organization and in Scientology orgs, if you don't know how to do it, you better figure it out. You learn the policy. You just learn. There's no, I don't know how to do this. It's like your job is now bus driver. Well, I don't know how to, I don't know how to drive a bus. Here's the manual. You're like, okay, fine.
Who was your senior there in Treasury?
It was Tony Ingalina, who's the woman I was actually, I think, replacing, and Vicky.
Tony Ingalina.
Yeah, Tony Ingalina. She's blonde. Tony was my senior.
Well, back then, maybe.
Yeah. And the commanding officer was, or her boss, who I'm pretty sure she was the CO, was Vicky Shantz.
Vicky Shantz. Oh my God. She is still the COCLOSUS.
Stop.
I swear to God. And she's one of my least favorite people I've ever encountered in the Sea Org, other than Ben Monahan, of course. But no, Vicky Shantz has been there the entire time. I don't know how she survived this long.
Me neither, especially there.
Yeah.
She was, so she was there. So Tony was my senior, and then it was Vicky. So I would deal with both of them at times. And honestly, my relationship with Vicky was non-existent. She was my boss, but she scared me. She was just so intense. But once in a while, she'd crack a smile. And I'd be like, ooh, we're friends now.
That didn't break her face.
Yeah, no, she was intense.
There was a question here. I saw a question here from Laura FM real quick. How old was your husband when that happened, when you suffered that miscarriage?
Let's see. Dan is 2 years older than me. So he had to have been about 19, 20.
So it's
you know what? I had to have been 18 because we got married when I was 17, but that was a few months before I turned 18. My mom had to go to the courthouse and sign off on it. But when I was in the CLO and I'm working there and I'm doing the Treasury thing, I was excited because I had a phone. There was a phone in my office, which meant I could regularly talk to my mom, who by then because my mom wasn't in the Sea Org, she was working at the Manor Hotel. And she ended up marrying a man named Corey, also not in the Sea Org. They were like, back then, they could have non-Sea Org staff, and they kind of got paid.
Back in the days of the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, back in the day. So she and Corey ended up moving to Minnesota, which is where I live now. And it's where Corey, who became my my mom's fourth husband, not related to the other one. So that was kind of nice. They ended up moving to Minnesota. And so I was excited because I could talk to my mom. She would call and I would be able to talk to her on the phone. So that was kind of nice. And because I was in treasury, I had to have a phone because I would handle the creditors. Now remember, I'm 18 years old. I had never had a credit card. I had never paid a utility bill. And even then they were struggling to pay their bills. So a lot of my job was making sure the lights didn't get shut off. I think that was probably the biggest part of my job. And then managing the finances for the cadet org. So the little cadets would come in with their money because they weren't old enough to have a bank account or anything. And so we would take care of that and help keep track. That actually was a highlight of my time there, was working with the kids from the cadet org. And at the same time, it broke my heart because you'd see them going in the shower when they'd cross the street from the cadet org with their towels. And they all wore these t-shirts way too big because you just wear what you get. So a lot of time it's the Way to Happiness shirts or whatever. And they'd go in there, and being in treasury and pretty much their treasury person, they would come, and I got to spend time with quite a few of them. And I enjoyed that. I loved kids. And then some people come, there's some mission or something, and they're like, we're here to find somebody to become, I think it was the LC PAC, so the L. Ron Hubbard communicator for the PAC base. It's a big job, a lot of responsibility. I saw it as a one-way ticket to the rehabilitation project force. I could see the writing on the wall. On paper, I look like I could do that job. So if you've ever been in the Sea Org where they're just like hell bent on you're going to do this job, you're not asked, by the way. You're not asked if you want to do it. That post needed to be approved by the watchdog committee. They went and did the whole thing. When I found out about it, it was being told, you were the only one who got approved. And I was like, oh shit, like this is not good, because I knew myself enough to know, man, I'm not gonna last 5 minutes. And I just was kind of like panicking, like this is, I don't want to do this. This isn't going to end well. Dan was working then. They had the audits task force going. That was like, they were doing this whole thing, right? Getting all these financial records in order. The whole thing was a nightmare. And I had gone off the birth control pills because they were giving me really bad headaches. And later on, I was like, oh, I should have just tried another brand or a different dose. I was getting massively bad headaches. So I just stopped taking it, which means we were back to just, let's see what happens. And honestly, I wanted to have children, but I wasn't. Dan and I, we did that dance where neither one of you really say it, but you're doing it. And there's a big chance that you might get pregnant. And honestly, after my miscarriage, I wanted to get pregnant. I felt like this loss, I don't know how to explain it. I just really was a little kind of obsessed with, I actually do want to have a baby. I knew I wanted to have kids, but then in the Sea Org, that rule coming out, what do you do? So I'm thinking, man, if I could get pregnant now, this would be great. And I did end up getting pregnant. And of course, you know how that goes. Some messengers come to my office and the whole thing. I was stupid. Knowing what I know now, I shouldn't have told them till I was past that 12-week point. I would have saved myself a lot of harassment and pressure. But this was new. This was my daughter was born in 1990. So it was 1989, like early 1990. The rule had been out for a few years at this point that you get sent to a failing smaller church somewhere in the boondocks. That's how it was always kind of presented to us, so that we would not want to do that. Or you were coerced to have an abortion. And at that time, I was hanging around with, oh my goodness, what's Jeff Pomerantz kid's name? Jeremy?
Oh, I never knew his kids.
Back then, Jeremy, and some of you who were around back in the day, you'll remember this. Jeremy was married to Jenny. They were both in the Sea Org, and Jenny was pregnant. I mean, like super pregnant. And Jenny and I got to be friends. In fact, it was Jenny who took me to a clinic to do my pregnancy test while she was massively pregnant. So, my period's late. I think I'm pregnant. Meanwhile, remember, they got me approved through Watchdog Committee to be this L. Ron Hubbard communicator for the Pacific base. And Jenny takes me to this free clinic and I do the pregnancy test and I'm pregnant. And I'm stressed but happy about it. And Jenny was happy for me, which was the only person who was. And I don't recall one thing when you're raised in Scientology and in the Sea Org, it really like, I might, pull some stuff, but I would always come clean about it because that's how you're indoctrinated to be. And really, not the worst thing either to just kind of like, come clean on stuff. But that also makes you like, sometimes you come clean on stuff you should not be talking about. So I have to tell my senior that I'm pregnant. And so I, get Tony in my office, and Tony Ingalina was married to Chris Ingalina, and they ended up moving to Seattle. And I think they now live in California, but as far as I know, they're still in.
And Tony's a woman, just for the record.
Tony's a woman. Yes, Tony is a woman. Chris is a dude. So I tell Tony, I'm like, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, can you tell Vicky, who's the, her senior, and who just terrifies me, even though I liked her and admired her at the same time. And Tony doesn't tell Vicky for a little while. And I find out why later. I'm like, why wouldn't you tell her right away? Like, what's the deal? Like, I want to get this going. I'm not going to go on this post, And remember, I was 18. I turned 19 while I was pregnant. So Tony doesn't tell Vicky, and I find out because guess what? Tony's pregnant. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, now Tony was still in the Sea Org when I got there. So I'm guessing I know how this story goes.
Yeah. But Tony was much further along, but nobody knew. So Tony was already on her way out, was going to be sent to, ended up getting sent to Seattle, which.
Oh, she had her baby?
Yeah, she had her baby.
Oh.
Yeah, she went on to have a couple babies. Yeah, she did.
Wow.
She had the baby. They went to Seattle. So then I'm there. And then, the messenger starts showing up with the, how can you do this? Basically, the coercion for the abortion starts. Yep. And they know that they have a short window to convince you to do this. And what really stuck in my mind is how young these girls were. I remember thinking, like, you're sitting here pressuring me to convince me that the best thing for me, not the best thing for me, the best thing for the organization, thereby me, is to abort this child. And I'm sitting there wondering, like, have you even had a period yet? Like, you have no idea. I'm newly pregnant, but I've got the hormones going, but I'm still a kid myself. I'm only like 18, 19 years old. And I push back and I push back and I push back. And one thing, it's like, even when I would be being screamed at and all that, I just always like kind of kept my cool about it. Cause I just thought, and I was right. Later on, I learned that this is true. If you're getting this force and this anger coming at you and you meet it with anger, you got lots of anger zooming around and it builds up into this thing. But if there's nothing that's coming back from you, what's going to happen? It could just dissipate. Not only that, I'm like, you train me. This is an organization that indoctrinated me from the time I was 8 years old and trained me to be able to not react when I didn't need to. You trained me so that I wouldn't be intimidated. You trained me so that I would hold my ground and back up LRH policy and defend the Sea Org whenever was necessary. That training also comes in handy when somebody's being, just super aggressive and screaming at you and all that. So they kind of did the good cop, bad cop, and they also knew, like, we're not telling you what to do. It's just, you should get an abortion. So I ended up not. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. We want our child. My husband wanted our child. And we also got sent to Seattle, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure she went straight to Seattle. I'm not sure, but she was there when I was there. But they ended up leaving the Sea Org. I was still on staff in Seattle. And that was, I went out there by myself let me back it up. My daughter, when I was pregnant with her, I was still on post and I was told to hide the pregnancy, cover it up as much as I could, cover up with my jacket, with my uniform, you weren't allowed to, I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. So I wasn't allowed to celebrate this except quietly with my mom on the phone.
Wow.
And I remember when I was very pregnant, like there was no hiding it anymore. I was in the bathroom and I ran into Kay. She was like
Connolly.
yes. Ran into her. I come out of the bathroom. I'm massively pregnant. And she looks at me up and down and she says, "How can you do that?" And I
Oh.
was just, oh Lord, because here's someone who also, she would do media for Scientology. You know,
Well, also, and Kay had her own kids.
yeah.
Did she have her kids by then? Do you know?
I don't know. She was older. She was older then to me. I mean, I was like 18,
Yeah.
19, and I remember thinking she was an older woman.
Yeah.
So maybe
Well,
they were
her
grown
daughter
already.
Trish is someone that I'm hoping to do a video with soon. She's
Oh, her
Trish.
daughter's
Did you know?
out?
Oh yeah, her daughter. Yes, both of her daughters are out.
Oh, wow. You know what? The name Trish Conley does sound familiar. But yeah, you're right. She was like, wasn't she like Australian or New Zealand
Yes.
or right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that just destroys me in that moment because here's this woman too who I respected, who I looked up to, who, you know, was doing media and things for the church. I thought, you know, all the things they go out and say about we're non-denominational and like all this stuff. Um, it just destroyed me in that moment. And I, right after that, the scene, like somebody in HCO, so the people in charge of, again, moving people around, comes to me and says, you know, and her name was Carol, and she was kind about it. And she basically said, like, it's, you know, it's time for you to step down. And I was so obviously pregnant, they didn't want me walking around the base.
Mm.
So I'm assuming that Kay said something. And because I was so pregnant, because in the Sea organization, I don't know if you know this, but pregnancy is contagious. If you see a pregnant woman, it might make you pregnant. If you
It's
talk to
funny
a
though, because
pregnant woman,
in a way, it kind of is though, right? Because they don't want the idea
yeah,
spreading. I
no,
could get pregnant too.
yeah, maybe I could do this. And honestly, I mean, they're probably onto something because all my time hanging out with Jenny Pomerantz, who was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'll be pregnant with Jenny. And I had to get what's called rollback,
Oh
which
yeah.
is a Scientology procedure where they trying to find out where you got that idea from. Where did you hear that? Who said it was okay? Who made it okay? And I left Jenny's name out of it.
The most experienced Sea Org members know to always roll back to someone you don't like.
I wasn't fast enough on my feet. So I ended up I was quarantined to my room because I was just so pregnant. My mom was in town at the time doing her OT levels, her operating thetan levels. And you would think, hey, my mom's there, I'm having a baby, that she would be there for the birth. No, she had to be auditing. She had to be auditing because that's what was best for the planet. My mom was staying at the Manor Hotel at the time. And I remember I went over there and I spent a couple nights with her because, you know, I was off post and just about to have this baby. I was going to the Gentle Birth Center, which is in Glendale. That's where I was getting my prenatal care. And that's where I was going to have my baby. It's pretty much where pregnant Sea Org members, and I think Scientologists went because what is her name? Tanya something. She got in massive legal trouble later. She was a midwife. And so I would go and we do like these group, I don't know, group, you're about to have a baby class. And I remember Suzette Hubbard was there.
Really?
Yeah. And she was married to, was it Guy?
Guy
I don't
White.
remember. Was it Guy White?
Well,
Yeah.
there's not that. There can't be more than one guy named Guy who's
Yeah.
married to one of L. Ron Hubbard's descendants.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those that don't know, Suzette was one of L. Ron Hubbard's daughters. And so she was in the thing and pregnant. But you know, you can't talk about these things. I couldn't talk to her and be all like, hey, are you in the Sea Org? Are you leaving too? Like, no. These conversations don't go on. You
Right.
wouldn't, even if I'd go to eat, well, eventually Dan had to bring my meals they didn't even want me in the dining room because pregnancy is contagious. And so she was in this birthing class and there were some other people. So I'm at the Manor Hotel one day. I spent the night with my mom and my water breaks right on the couch in her room. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I get over to my husband, Dan. I don't know where he was. He picks me up. We go to the Gentle Birth Center to have this baby. And it's a natural birth because in Scientology, you want to be quiet and you don't want to use drugs because it could hurt the baby.
Wow.
And so I had a natural birth, and thankfully it wasn't ridiculously long. It was like 3.5 hours. Because again, if I'm doing anything, I'm going to do it well. And my daughter's born at around 3:30. We were out of there by probably 6:37 because it's a
Wow.
birthing center. It's not a hospital. I found out years later, I'm talking, I found this out just a couple years ago, that this Tanya woman was brought up on charges because babies were dying. Like there were 2 or 3 deaths at the same time I was there having my daughter. Like I
Oh my
had no
God.
idea. Because again, we weren't reading newspapers. We didn't get to do any of that. So I have my daughter and we go back to the base and we go back to our room, and I'm not allowed to leave with the baby because they're getting ready to send me to Seattle. But it was taking like 2 weeks to get everything sorted. So for 2 weeks, I had my newborn in this room where we weren't allowed to leave. We put her in a drawer with blankets. We're not animals, but there was nowhere to put her. You're not getting a bunch of baby gear. But here's the really super cool and sweet thing. Those cadets from the cadet org, they bought me a stroller. They bought a
No
baby
way.
stroller with their own money, or maybe they
Oh,
got it somehow. I don't know. And they brought it to me. And I mean,
wow.
obviously at risk of, because no one's allowed to show me any kindness when I was pregnant or having this baby. And it just touches me now. These kids, with nothing. Oh, damn it. So they bring the stroller, and I think at that point I kind of rebelled a bit and I took her out a few times in the stroller to go walk around, but not much. And my husband would bring me meals because I had to stay in the room with his baby, because if someone sees it, it might be contagious to want to have babies. And so I get on a plane to go to Seattle, and it was 3 months, I think, before my husband ever showed up because he was still working there. I think he was
They
doing the
didn't even
audit
send you
task force.
together?
No, nope,
Oh my God.
nope. Just me, little old me, and this
How could he be
2-week-old
okay with that?
Well, he wasn't okay with it, but what was he going to do? You know,
Wow.
he didn't have authorization to leave, and I'm the one who had the baby. So it was easier to just, get me moved to Seattle. And 2 weeks after giving birth, I got on a plane with some suitcases, went to Seattle. I ended up moving in with another Sea Org couple who was there. Um, Richard and Linda. Now she's Linda Smith because they divorced. So I don't remember their last name, what Richard's last name was, but Richard was, I think, the executive director for the daytime organization, which is where I was going to be working. And Linda, they're both Sea Org members, but Linda was kind of on an LOA. So she was being the nanny, except we had to pay her. So she would take the day I got there, I had to go to the org. I had to figure out how to catch a bus to go from where we were to go to the org to go on post. I had a baby 2 weeks ago, and I'm just like handing my baby off to somebody I just met. And this went on. I would go on post, and then I'd, be home with the baby when I could be home. And it was about 3 months before Dan came. And that time in Seattle were probably some of the worst years of my life. I mean, it was, now looking back, I can look back with the eyes I have today and understand that I was definitely depressed. And who wouldn't be? I didn't want to stay in the Sea Org. And it was, I wouldn't qualify as saying it was worse than being in the Sea Org. When you're out there, you have to be on staff. You have no way to support yourself because you have to get another job, or one of you does. And now you got to get diapers. You have this baby to take care of, but you have to be on post full time and you're a Sea Org member. So when Dan came, he worked on the foundation org. So we were on opposite schedules, and then he would work during the day. He got a job.
Oh my God.
So we're just on this constant, our marriage was doomed. Doomed. And we went, and I think we lasted, oh gosh. He came 3 months later, and I mean, you just put your head down and it's just the grind. And just trying to just hold it together, while we're there trying to like have this baby and all this stuff. And it was a really bad time. It was a really bad time. I think that was probably the hardest it was mentally and emotionally. In ways, I think it was because you're dealing with so many different things in the Sea Org. You're isolated. You're dealing with a heck of a lot of crazy.
Well, Natalie, I spent many more years on staff in Philadelphia, day foundation schedule, than I did in the Sea Org. And I will say, from my perspective, being on staff is harder than being in the Sea Org if you're working a day in foundation schedule.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when and I won't belabor this point because it's your story, but like having to handle in the real world, rent, groceries, a job, a car, a significant other, commuting. I would every day fall asleep while driving from work to the org. I mean, literally, the rumble strips on the freeway would wake me up.
Wow.
Like, because whereas in the Sea Org, you're not getting a lot of sleep, but you also don't have to commute anywhere. You don't have to worry about bills. You don't have to worry about buying food. It's easier to be in the Sea Org, although in some ways the abuse can be worse in the Sea Org.
Yeah.
I would argue it's easier to be in the Sea Org than it is to be a staff in many cases.
The other thing too about being in the Sea Org versus staff in the Sea Org, it's much stricter, right? With the rules. I knew staff members that would still go out and have fun. Not all the time. In fact, they took me out for my 21st birthday. I still remember it. It was actually a lot of fun. But in the Sea Org, it's just more regimented, and you just don't have time to mess around. You don't have the time or the bandwidth for anything else but to just focus and do what you're doing. And then as a staff member, being out more in the world, you're seeing a little bit of what you're actually missing, and you're poor. You have no money. You're barely getting by. You're having the demands of you on staff. Still the Sea Org, I'll still get my balls busted by, I think I got 2-3 times I had to go back to LA. Initially I was working with the flag. It basically was like regging for flag. And what's so funny is I'd never been to flag.
But the Flag World Tour?
It was like a satellite office. FSC office. Yes, that's what it was. So Richard Smith at the time, that's right. He wasn't the ED at the time. That came later. He was the flag service consultant, and I was working with him. I think I remember it that way, but I know for sure I was being a flag service consultant, and they wanted to send me to Orange County to go kind of work with an apprentice under Barbara something. She was
Schwartz?
Well, no. Fred was at PAC. Officing Fred and Gretchen Schwartz were at PAC. Right. But Barbara, I want to say she was at Orange County org.
Barbara Tompkins? No, not Barbara Tompkins.
No, she had like kind of like spiky dark brown hair.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. She was from the East Coast, I think. Which funny, a lot of I think the most productive Reggies were from the East Coast.
The New Yorkers.
So I get sent out there with Barbara to work with Barbara. So I'm living it. Finally, Dan comes to Seattle, and I get shipped to Orange County with my baby, and I'm going to go train there and do these like events set up. I was like the advanced person for events. So before I actually was in the Oregon, Seattle, I worked for that flag service consultant. So
Yeah.
I did a little bit of traveling where I would work with two OT8s. These are two gentlemen who got to the top of the Scientology bridge to total freedom. Was Dennis Feeney and Jerry Ratchiff, who actually were kind of a hoot. I'd fly out to New Mexico and I would set up the event, and then they would come and they would do this event, and then they would do I didn't do any regging. I'd never been to flag. And we did this in New Mexico, around California. I went to a few places in Canada. And again, I've got this baby, back home, and I'm doing that for a while. And then they did away with that no, you can't have parents who are Sea Org members, and they need to be in the Class 5 org. And when I was in the flag service consultant area, I remember it's like we had access to money because we needed to tour. So it's like food wasn't so much of a thing. You were a little more taken care of. So I didn't mind it in that way. It was just hard being away. So they did away with that. And then I had to actually work in the Oregon, Seattle. And I think I worked in Division 6, where I was in charge of getting new people in. And it was horrible. It was it was just not a good thing. I was just in such a state of, you get into this world where you can see people walking down the street outside, or I would go to get coffee. I had never gotten coffee somewhere before. So Seattle was a great place to learn about coffee. I will say that. And I'd go and, I also didn't know how addictive caffeine was in espresso. Developed a little bit of a problem, but with the help of somebody and some supplements, I was backing off on the espresso. But you see, I'd see parents and with their babies and people living what I kept thinking of. These are such real lives. I just want to live a real life. I just want to live a real, like a normal person. And I didn't want to be married. I didn't want to be married to Dan anymore. He's a wonderful guy, real stand-up guy. But I didn't want to be married. We never should have gotten married to begin with. We got married at the Manor Hotel. And I remember getting in the elevator with my bridal party, and the elevator got stuck on the way to the altar. That was a sign. We were stuck for I don't know how long. The wedding was starting. We were stuck in the elevator. It was just, I knew then that I should not be doing this, but I did. And so we ended up, it just wasn't going, neither one of us was happy. Dan was working all day, and then he'd go to the org and he'd work in the evenings and the weekends. And I wanted to get a divorce, but if we got a divorce, that meant one of us, potentially both of us, would be leaving the Sea Org. And in Scientology and as a Sea Org, as many of you probably know, your marriage is supported or torn apart purely based on how it best benefits Scientology. And to have us divorce means I would leave. I was going to leave and move to Minnesota, that they would then lose a Sea Org member and lose a staff member. So we were pushed, no, you can't get a divorce. No, you can't split up, which that was no good for, our marriage. It was just, we were both absolutely miserable. And then too, I was 19, 20 years old. I wasn't, great about communicating in relationships. I wasn't the fabulous partner that I am today. We were both absolutely miserable, and I couldn't get this divorce. So I come up with this idea. I think well, maybe if I do something super out ethics, I could maybe either get kicked out of the Sea Org or, definitely end my marriage. And Dan, to his credit, he did not want to get a divorce. If he wanted the divorce, I think it would have been a lot easier. And so I'm like, okay, all right, this is a solid plan here, in my 19, 20-year-old brain. And I was working, again, my job was to get people into Scientology, get them signed up on their next courses. And I meet this guy, his name's Brett. And I think, oh, he's good looking. And we kind of hang out. And one drunken weekend, we hook up. We hook up in this car. And because, I'm an honest person, I go in Monday morning. Plus, I'm trying to blow up my marriage. I'm trying to blow up my life so I can just do something different and something new. It was like this feeling of I wasn't looking at it I'm going to do this and then for sure I'll be able to get out. It was I don't care. I just don't effing care. I can't take it anymore. I just have to do something that makes me feel like I have some sense of control and that I'm breaking out of this. And I thought that sleeping with this man would be it. And I go in on Monday and I go to the ethics officer and I'm like, there's something I need to tell you. I had an affair. Even though Dan and I were sleeping in different rooms and on the outs, we were married. This was full blown, definitely adultery. It was. And I knew it when I did it. And when I went in, I'm like, this is what I did. We probably should get a divorce. And they weren't having it. They weren't having it. It was like, no, you got to do marriage counseling, which is a joke. And I thought for sure Dan would want the divorce. So she's like, have you told Dan? I'm like, no. I was hoping that we could do that together. So he gets pulled in and I tell him and he's upset. But he's still not wanting to get a divorce. And at this point, I'm like, I cheated on you. I am scum. I am an adulterer. I should have a scarlet letter on my face, on my shirt, whatever. Still doesn't want to get a divorce. I'm like, okay. And then even more so, I'm like, I just felt so trapped. I can't get this divorce. I can't leave the Sea Org. I'm completely broke. I don't even think I had a driver's license at that point. Maybe I did. I think I might have gotten it in California. But this is just not happening. So the weeks are going by. We do a little bit of marriage counseling. What is there to confess at that point? Marriage counseling in Scientology is you sit in there on the e-meter and you get off your overts, your harmful acts, what you've done. And the idea is it brings you close together, which in theory kind of makes some sense. But that's not what was happening. I'd already, I shared everything because I wanted out. I wanted out of this marriage. I wanted out of this Sea Org. I wanted out of this town. And none of that was happening. So weeks go by. I find out I'm pregnant. Dan and I hadn't been together for months and months because we were, I was pretty much done. But yeah. Oh yeah. Life got real fun at that point. So I'm pregnant again, not with my husband's child, but with a public Scientologist's child. And it gets even more interesting. And this is, this came out ages ago. So I don't think I'm really blabbing anybody's business here. It's well known. I've been very honest about this with even my children. He was there in Seattle, but then he decides, because after it comes out that, no, it's before I found out I was pregnant, the man that I cheated with and got pregnant by, Brett, who was a new Scientologist, he decides he's moving to Florida. I think it was Florida. It could have been, might have been Miami, because he was going to go marry this other Scientologist who he also got pregnant. Yeah. So he's got 2 women pregnant, one Sea Org member, one, I think she may or may not have been on staff. They met somehow. And I think through some traveling, or she met him while she was on vacation in Washington or somewhere, and they hooked up and she got pregnant. She was not a Sea Org member. So we're doing this marriage counseling, and then I'm like, okay, and I'm pregnant. Surely this is going to make Dan want to divorce me. It did not.
Oh my goodness.
Did not.
What is wrong with this guy?
I don't know. It did not. And so I said, look, now I'm pregnant, which I did not expect. And what am I going to do? I've got a baby my girls are 2 years apart. So, take away the 9 months. I've got a toddler, and now I'm about to have this other baby. And at that point, I was just in utter, complete apathy. There was never a question that I wasn't going to keep the baby, because, and that was an option too, back to the whole abortion conversation. And I was like, don't even say those words to me. I'm like, no, not doing it. I wanted to have another child. I didn't mean to go about it and do it that way, but I did want to have another child. And so did Dan. He wanted to have another child. And so it was decided that we would stay married and Dan would raise the child as his own. Yeah. So I have my daughter, whose name is Kelsey, and she's absolutely fabulous. So my daughters are Shelby and Kelsey. at this point. And Dan and I are staying together, but not together, but living together. And it just I know I was unhappy. I can't completely speak for him. I can't imagine that he was super happy, but he was an amazing dad. He was great with our daughter. He loved Kelsey. He was there every step of the way through my pregnancy. He's a good guy. And it's just, we just weren't compatible just in other ways. When you get married like that at that young age, you get married, you're not dating. Had we dated for any length of time, I think we both would have realized that, hey, this is just not working. Eventually, what ended up happening when we finally did divorce, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. I sat Dan down and I said, I don't want you to answer this right now. I want you to really think about it. And I said, if we weren't married, am I someone that you would hang out with? Don't answer. Think about it. If we weren't married, I'm just someone you know, and you know me and you know my personality. Would you want to hang out with me? And to his credit, he took some time and he thought about it. Then he came back to me and he said, no. I hugged the man. I was like, do you see what I'm saying now? We should not be married. I mean, if for no other reason, like, look what I did to you and I put you through. But he so loved our daughter and still does that, he was willing to overlook that too. And then we did end up getting a divorce. But what happened was we stayed married. I was miserable. And I was then working as the public executive secretary, getting people into Scientology. I just was like, fine, this is my life. This is my lot. I'm just going to do a good job. I did my post pretty good. I did pretty well. And it's just like, I guess I'm just going to be miserable, and I would try to have some fun here and there. Some of the staff there I got to be really close to, and they were fun. Like I said, they took me out for my 21st birthday, got absolutely blottoed and did karaoke. It was so much fun. Things I never did. I never did that as a teenager. I never had the opportunity to do that. And we ended up, it was one of those, I mean, my drinking got a little out of hand. Today, I don't drink. I gave up alcohol 7 years ago for exactly reasons like this. I just drank too much. I just did it too much. I didn't moderate it. And I gave myself once, I was like, all right, you have a year to cut back. I drank more than I ever did. And so after that, just one day I was like, I just need to be done. I need to be done. I don't moderate this well. How many times can I lose my underwear and pee myself? It's just, I can't do this. No more throwing up in the bushes. And I just stopped. So I go and so I wasn't a huge drinker, but we would drink and we would have these events, the international events at hotels in Seattle. And we had this one event. And afterwards, I went to the bar with the executive director at the time, who was a good friend of mine. Throughout my pregnancy, we hung out and stuff, and we got written up for that because me, him, my junior, we're all getting our drink on in the bar, and we were right after the event. So the knowledge report was public could be walking by. And this is the thing. Anybody else looks at this and goes, okay, so if you're working at Dunder Mifflin, you get together with your coworkers and you go out and you have some drinks, or maybe you have an event, you do that. This is normal behavior. This is not anything that is so horrible, like I ran over a baby or something. It was the level of just animosity. And again, around the subject of sex, there's just so much craziness in the Sea Organ and in Scientology about this. It's just so they thought I was having an affair with the executive director, and I wasn't. And it was this whole thing. So I get pulled. I'm like, I got to go to Los Angeles to get, I'm going to get a committee of evidence. And I'm like, awesome. This will be my opportunity to route out, be done. I'm leaving. I'm out of here. I wasn't planning on leaving Scientology at that time, just the Sea Organization. And I'm like, so I go out there, and on my way there, how are we doing on time? Because are we all right? We should keep going. Okay.
Yeah.
On my way out there, I am sexually assaulted. There's a guy on a plane. This was back in the day. It was he totally Danny Mastersoned me. He put something in my drink on the plane. And being naive, I remember him asking me questions. I had somehow gotten upgraded to first class for some bizarre reason. And I was in first class and sitting next to this guy who was, a handsome guy. And he was asking me questions, and like an idiot, I'm like, no one's picking me up in LA. No one knows I'm coming. I mean, basically told him everything he needed to know. And he got up because he's like, do you want a drink? So I'm like, flight attendant, because we're in first class too. He goes, no, I'll go get it. I still don't think anything because this is 1990. Kelsey was born in 92, 93. I didn't know about roofies and stuff like that at this point, right? And I had 2 drinks and I just like felt so, I had never done drugs before. I don't think I'd even had like Oxy or anything like that. And I felt so out of it. Like I didn't know what was happening and felt like I was drifting, like I was awake, but drifting in and out of consciousness at one point. Like I was just super, super, super drunk, which I should not have been with 2 cocktails. Because remember, I had been getting my drink on, so I had a little bit of a tolerance. And we land at LAX, and he takes me to his apartment, which he tells me is not his apartment. I did remember that part. And I have parts of this that I am very clear on because later on when I had to share this, I was very specific about what I remembered, what I could remember. And he sexually assaulted me. And I remember being put in a shower and him, washing me, trying to get rid of the evidence. And it was this weird, it's like I was watching it from the corner of the room. Like I could see myself in the corner of the room watching what was happening with the parts I could remember. And then I would just like black out. And then I just couldn't remember. It's like I felt like I could hear but not see. My senses just kind of kept changing like that. And I couldn't remember. There was like this, my memory was a big issue the next day. So, or morning or whatever it was. This goes on overnight. And he puts me in a cab. I'm super confused because I don't know. I know what happened, but I don't know what happened. I'm thinking, in my mind, I knew I did not consent to this. I can remember waking up and what he was doing to me. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But then I would black out again. So I'm just like, I'm in total shock. Like, I don't know what to think. He is acting normal. And so I go into my default. I just go right into my Sea Org and just, okay, I'll go back to the base. I get in the cab. I go back to the base. I'm there for a committee of evidence. So I'm already a piece of crap.
Wait, so this guy was not a Scientologist, right?
No, he was not.
But you were supposed to go to the airport and go right to the base. But you're arriving a day late, right?
Yeah, but it was like, no one was set. You know how it is when you arrive, nobody's there to meet you. Nobody's there to greet you. No one was going to be picking me up. I was going to have to take a cab. I was getting myself to the base so that I could show up for my committee of evidence. But I was going to show up and say, I want out. I want a route out. And which, you can't tell anybody back in Seattle at that time. And so I walk into, you remember the Horseshoe?
Yeah.
At the PAC base. I forget which street that was on. So I go in. Yeah. I think it was Catalina. There was the reception there. That's where they used to stop all the, all that when people were being served and stuff, you weren't allowed to take anything, sign anything. You worked reception there. So I'm just literally numb. I'm in shock. I was in shock for a while. And I'm going through the motions. I'm completely what they would call bad indicators, which was very, even they even knew was unusual for me. Because even with all this stuff going on, I'm always like finding the bright side and just trying to make the best of it. And I was just destroyed. I was just numb. And I remember a female security guard took me up to, I was going to be staying in her room because I said I wanted to leave. So at that point, I'm under security watch. So I'm going to be staying in her room. So I'm ordered to go up there, get changed, come back down, and then start painting the security office or something. We were doing manual labor because I said I wanted to leave. And so I was changing my clothes and she saw, and there were bruises on me. and marks on me. So she went to the head of security and said, somebody's hurting her. They thought it was Dan, that he
Oh
was
my
beating
God.
me or doing something. And so I get called into security. I say nothing about what happened because, one, I don't even know what happened exactly. I'm just having these flashes of what happened. And I'm trying my best not to process it. So it was Jose was there. I don't know if he's still there. Don was an Asian guy. He had gotten into an accident and he had a lot of burns on him. So I knew Don and Jose from my days in the estates org. So I get pulled into the office. I don't remember if it was Don or Jose or if there was another guy. Was it Roger? And they basically questioned me about it, thinking that it's Dan, that, he's hurting me. And then I just break down and I tell them what happened. And they went and this is pre-internet. Okay. This is 90, well, maybe it wasn't pre-internet, but it was like, you didn't have a phone. You couldn't just look stuff up. They didn't have computer access right there. They take me into like the control room where you got all the cameras and all that stuff. And they had some kind of book. I think it was a medical book. And they looked up different drugs and they showed it to me. And it was, I think it was like Rohypnol. And every single thing on there is what I experienced. And it was actually the security guys. And in hindsight, how did they know about this? How were they familiar with this? Right? At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, these are guys I've known since I was 15 years old. And I just came clean about the whole thing. And they were, asked, like documented everything, asked me a bunch of questions, looked in the drug book. We figured out what it was. And they showed me, they're like, this is probably why I couldn't remember, because it gives you amnesia. There were only bits and pieces that I could recall, but I knew who the guy was, because at one point I got up and I went into the kitchen and there was a piece of mail with his name on it, which I knew his first name. I didn't know his last name. He told me that was someone else's apartment. It turned out it was his apartment, and he had a wife and kids and they weren't in town. So
Wow.
but here's the interesting thing. So security being security, the Sea Org being security, you want to find out, right? Who is this guy? Is there a risk? Blah, 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 blah. So they call. I must have maybe it was a card, because I had his phone number, but I think I took it off the fridge. Like I knew enough to know I was in trouble. And before he knew I was out of the room, I grabbed it and I put it in my pocket. So it identified him. And I think it had a phone number on it. And then he took me back in. And that's when I think he put me in the shower. And he gave me another drink too. So there's probably something in that, because it's like when I would kind of come to, I'd be all out of it again. So security, and I don't remember exactly who it was, but I was right there. It might have even have been on the call. We call his house. I think they just looked up, they found his number. They found the house number because I had his name. And a woman answers, and it's his wife. And they basically pretend to be doing a survey to find out information about who this guy is that did this, right? Meanwhile, I didn't go to the doctor. No, wasn't going to the doctor, wasn't allowed to call the police, wasn't allowed to report it.
They wouldn't let you call the police?
No, absolutely.
Even though the guy's not a Scientologist.
No. And you know what? I thought about this. I was like screaming at the television the whole time during the Danny Masterson trial and all of that. I'm like, these people aren't going to cover up sexual assault just because it's a Scientologist. They're going to cover it up so the police don't come at all for any reason. And so they found out who he was. So they knew exactly who he was, what he did. He was an actor. And they knew exactly who he was. I knew exactly who he was at that point. After this phone call they made to his, unbeknownst to his wife, she was giving up all this information. It was back in the day. People weren't as, like if you called someone today and started asking random questions, they'd be like, click. It was different back then. And she was more than happy to share about his big career break that he was just getting and what was happening and what he was in and all this. And he was this is a crazy thing too about sexual assault is not about sex. It's about control. It's about anger. This was a handsome man. He also was incredibly strong. He was a world champion it was karate or taekwondo. I remember because he was picking up this giant trophy at a baggage claim, and he was on his way back from some kind of tournament. So this was a very, 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 I remember thinking how strong he was. Like I couldn't even push back. Like I felt like I couldn't move. And so they know exactly who he is. So then I'm thinking like, okay, we're going to call the cops. We're going to bust him. No, none of that. They know I want to leave, that I want to leave this organization. They know that I'm getting a ComEv and those wheels are turning, but they don't want anyone to know about what happened. So it was Carol, who was the senior HCO person from before, who told me I had to go to my room when I was too pregnant. She comes down and she sits me down and says, I know that you want to leave the Sea Org. I'm like, yeah, I want to leave the Sea Org. I've wanted to leave. I just want to move to Minnesota, be with my mom and, be done. And so I just want to start me on the routing form. Like I wasn't even thinking about and processing the whole sexual assault thing. I did the Sea Org thing. I compartmentalized it and just pushed it aside and all that emotion aside. And then she says, she leaves and she comes back and she says, we will let you leave the Sea Org. You won't need to do a routing form, but you can never speak about this. You can't tell anyone back in Seattle. You can't tell anyone here, and we'll let you just leave.
About the assault?
Yep.
What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They didn't want me to report it. Like I said, I didn't go to medical, nothing. And I had obvious bruises and stuff on me because that's how they figured it out. So this was basically the deal. I would be allowed to leave the Sea organization without a sec check, without a routing form. I was to go back to Seattle, not speak to anyone at the org, and just move to Minnesota and be an ex-Sea Org member, pay off my freeloader debt, and then, do my own thing. Wow. And of course I said,
they still were going to give you a freeloader debt though.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely they did. And I took that deal. The last thing I wanted to do at that point was to keep rehashing what happened, especially when I couldn't remember a lot of it. And I still had to go through the committee of evidence.
Oh my God.
I still had to go before these people for some other stuff that I didn't even do. And they were going to fitness board me out of the Sea Org. So it was going to look like that I got a committee of evidence and I was fitness boarded out of the Sea Org for some whatever. I never solved the finding in Rex. I don't even know what happened or if they even finished it. They didn't know. The committee, I wasn't allowed to talk to the committee about it, about what happened. This was like this side deal. So I took the deal. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I just want to leave. So I go through the committee of evidence. I'm allowed to leave. Interesting thing though, while I'm there doing my manual labor, I'm there with one of my friends who I knew from my early days. And not only did I know her from my early days in the Sea Org, I knew her when we were kids in Hawaii. And her name was Chantel. And oh God, what's her last name now? She was on the Aftermath, I think.
Chantel Dodson.
Is that her last name now?
Well, that's her married name now. Let me pull her up. We're friends on Facebook.
Yeah,
well,
she was
on
married
Facebook
to
is Chantal Dodson.
Yes, Dodson. That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Has a flower shop. Chantel was there, and we knew each other from, again, we were little kids in Hawaii because her
She's
parents.
From Hawaii?
Well, I don't know if she's from there, but Richard and Ramina were in Hawaii at the time, I believe, and that's why she and Natalie.
Ramina Nunley is her mom.
Yeah, they're
right?
out now. Yep.
Yes.
So they were in Hawaii when we were kids, because I remember we used to play. My sister and I played with these two girls, and I always remembered one of them was named Natalie, which is because I was named Natalie. And we'd play in this creek behind the org, and we would catch these frogs. And when I went into the Sea Org later, and I met Chantel, and she had spent time in Hawaii, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Just having no idea that we had already met before. And I tell this story about the frog in the back, and she starts telling the other half of the story. And we just go, oh, that's you. It was her when we were little kids. It was her and her sister and me and my sister. So we really kind of bonded then. And then when we were in the Sea Org, she was married to, I think, Dylan, who was the bookstore officer over at AO. And
not Dylan Code, though. Not Dylan Code.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think so. Was he the bookstore officer at the Advance Org?
He was.
His dad
he was
some
still
kind
the
of
bookstore
motorcycle
officer later when I was there.
Oh my gosh. His dad was
He's out
like
of the
some
Sea Org now.
motorcycle guy.
Yeah, his dad is Keith Code.
Yeah. Motorcycle or dirt bikes, something.
Motorcycle race. He's a racer.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
School and everything.
So she was there in trouble because she wanted to leave too. So we were painting the security office together. So the whole time I'm there going through this, my only light in this is Chantel.
Wow.
And at that time, I'd have to ask her. I haven't talked to her in a little while. I don't know that I even told her what happened. I honestly cannot recall. I'll have to ask her about that. But she just knew that I was routing out as well, that I was leaving. And so I get the committee of evidence, and then I go back to Seattle and I do just what they told me. I'm not allowed to talk to anybody. I get my stuff. I leave. I go to Minnesota. Dan's supposed to be routing out there. And once again, I'm because at this point he hadn't agreed to divorce me yet. So we
and
were
your
going.
husband doesn't even know about the assault.
No, he didn't know. I think I did tell him the truth. But that was it. I didn't tell my mother for 20 years. I told no one except my husband for 20 years. Because of course, what's the other thing that convinced you? Well, but I mean, you must have done something. You do understand that, right? I mean, you pulled it in, obviously, especially considering your earlier behavior, your earlier out ethics. Because remember, this is the girl who cheated on her husband and got pregnant. So this other thing happening to me was just a complete, reaction to that. And I believed it, and I just bought it. When they told me I couldn't tell anyone back in Seattle, I found out after I moved to Minnesota that they told the senior staff at the org that I had cheated on my husband and got kicked out of the Sea Org. That I had cheated on my husband again and got kicked out of the Sea Org. That's what they said. My sexual assault was consensual, and that's what happened. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God.
And guys, this is what they're doing to a member who wasn't being expelled.
Yeah.
You were still in good standing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're still a Scientologist, and this is what they're doing to you.
Mm-hmm. 100%. They had their story to explain my departure from the Sea Org and my departure from Seattle. I was to move out of the state. That was actually, I wanted to move out of the state anyways, but that was another condition of theirs, is you need to leave. You can't be there, because they were just too concerned about people finding out. And I remember thinking, like, I get the not wanting to involve the police and stuff, but the guy wasn't a Scientologist. Like, what? I was the Scientologist. Where was the protecting me? There was none of that. It was my fault. It was my fault that happened. And the best thing I could do was protect the Sea Org, protect Scientology at that point from having any type of, they made it sound like there would be some type of legal consequence for them, which which made no sense to me. Because I'm like, the police, I didn't know how it worked, but the police would come, they would take my story and all that, and this guy would be put away. There's no way this was the first time he did this.
Jesus.
No. And so I go ahead and I moved to Seattle. I don't say anything. Dan knew. I moved to Minnesota. Shortly after we were in Minnesota, when Dan finally came, is when we had the conversation, and he finally agreed to divorce me. And we divorced, and Dan moved to Sacramento. And then I stayed in Minnesota with the kids, and then he would fly out, take the kids for a week or two. This went on for years, both the girls. And Dan and I still have a great relationship. I vacation with him and his fiance. His fiance has stayed at my house without him, with me and my partner. My sister has vacationed with them to go back, because Dan likes to go to Hawaii and we share these kids. He took my son from my second husband to Hawaii once. I mean, I am thankful in that, even though, we've got this different family dynamic, and I have 3 kids, and I have 2 husbands and a baby daddy, the middle one, as I call him, and I'll text and be like, "Happy Father's Day, baby daddy." We even now have a decent relationship. All of these, even my second husband, and this is, I think, one of the things that, even though, did I go about doing very non-traditional, right? But today, we all communicate. We all share in the parenting of these children, and now our grandchildren together. Any one of these men, whether it's my 2 ex-husbands or my daughter's biological dad, would go have lunch with me tomorrow, would even like go on a trip with my partner now and me. We worked through that and decided that we're not going to let like the whole Sea Org thing, the whole Scientology take any more from us. We're going to be a family. We're going to still non-conventional, but we're still going to operate as a family together. If you need something, we're going to be there for you. If I need something, they're going to be there for me. If the kids need something, they're going to be there. And that is how it has been. It took work to get there, but that is where we're at. And that's something that, I think really pissed off the church. The guy, for, in the 20 years of keeping that secret, I didn't tell my mom until we were just about to leave. She was about to leave Scientology. In fact, my mom says it's the thing that pushed her. It was the last straw. My mom was on Solo Knots. My mom was the head of the OT committee, which is like the PTA of the Scientology. If you're a public person, very extremely active Scientologist. And obviously things had been happening with her, and it flagged that she had disagreements with the constant demands for money. There were things going on at Flag that she said she felt like they were trying to make her feel like she was crazy. Even with auditing, because she was expressing some doubts and like, hey, this isn't right. And, what do? If they can't get you to toe the line, they try to make you incapable of doing anything, drive you into apathy so that you can't fight. And I think that's part of why they took that route with me, because I'm a little sassy, I fight. And they took advantage of the fact that I was broken. And if they could drive this home, it would just shut me up. And it did. It worked for a long time. And when I finally told my mom, I think it was even in that moment, she's like, I'm done. She's like, that's it. And then later on, when we would talk about like what kind of led to us finally pulling, finally hitting the I'm out of here button, it was that for her. She's like, the fact that happened to you, they covered it up, they lied about it. On top of that, even with the people back in Seattle didn't know.
And there's so many levels to it. The worst level is what happened to you. When I try to look at it from your mom's perspective, I would feel so betrayed by my organization that nobody told me this happened to my daughter. That
is exactly what her reaction was. She was pissed. She was livid. She couldn't believe it. She already had kind of these seeds of doubt, and she was having health issues as well. She had while she was on Solo Knot, she needed a kidney transplant. So I gave her a kidney, and she never went, I don't think she went back onto auditing the level after that, but she still had some trips to Flag. I think they were still trying to get her to. But it was when I shared that with her, which for me, it was kind of like, if I'm going to lose my family because I'm going to leave Scientology, I want them to know the truth about what happened, about how I ended up moving, how I ended up in Minnesota, how I left the Sea Org the way that I did. That's why when I was in Minnesota and Dan had moved, then I was, a single mom with these 2 very young kids. And it was like 5 years or so. And I was just working and taking care of my kids. I wasn't really doing much at the org. Once in a while, I'd go in for something. I had a freeloader debt. And then the tax exempt, the whole IRS thing came out. And you remember they had that thing where your freeloader bill could just be $5,000.
Oh,
regardless
I
of what it
wasn't
was.
aware of the freeloader part of that, but I remember, what was it
The
called? The
amnesty.
amnesty.
The
The
amnesty.
amnesty.
Mhm.
Yes.
There was the amnesty.
Mm.
So my mom pushed really hard because she wanted me back in the church. She wanted me back doing services. That she still believed at that point that it, you know, it would help. At that point she didn't know what happened. She didn't know what happened in Seattle. So I ended up just kind of, I really wasn't doing anything except going to an occasional event with her for about 5 years or so. And then I met my husband, my second husband. And then I'd gotten on the course, and then, we got married, and then I was kind of more solidly back in the church at that point. And then we had a son, and we were married for 11 years. And I still the whole time, and I made it through OT4, which is
Wow.
operating Thetan level 4 on the Scientology Bridge to Total Freedom. You can go up to 8. I made it to 4. After all of this.
Wow.
And I know they knew still, like in the C organization, as part of my, when you do the upper levels in Scientology, you have to go through these security clearances. You also go through quite a bit more of auditing and mostly a lot of security checking. And this came up because it was an upset for me. And it was one of the orgs in LA. I don't remember if it was the AO or it actually might have been at ASHO. And I was doing my preparations. They're called OT preps, operating Thetan preparations that you need to do the OT levels. So I was there to do that. And this comes up in session about the sexual assault. Session gets stopped. Next thing I know, I'm with a Sea Org auditor now. The other one was Sea Org, but I'm with a very different Sea Org auditor at this point, somebody who had more clearances. Because when I didn't have any clearances in the Sea Org, you got to remember, I was like, I did my job in the Sea Org, but by Sea Org standards, I was probably the laziest Sea Org member that existed. And by anyone else's standard, I would have been absolutely productive and a great employee. But by the Sea Org standards, with the expectations of the all-nighters and all that, I just always managed to weasel my way out of that kind of stuff. How I didn't get in trouble for it more often is beyond me, but I think it's just because I'm charming. But we ended up, this kind of gets to where then we leave. And we're all going to, my mom is like, nope, we're leaving. And I'm like, I got to back it up. I'm married. I'm going through my upper levels. This comes up. They switch the auditors on me. And then because I needed to be audited by somebody who had some clearances in the Sea Org. That's right. That's where I was at. Even though I had no clearances, I was nobody. I worked at, the Dunder Mifflin of Sea Org organizations at middle management. It was because of that. And I still, to this day, I'm like, why was it such a big deal for them? This guy wasn't a Scientologist. I was. I was a Sea Org member, but there was so much went into covering it up and not letting it known. And when I was doing my auditing, my Scientology counseling, it was an upset for me. And if you have an upset, it gets addressed a certain way. It was addressed that way. I wasn't sat down and told that's not what happened, blah, blah, blah. It was run that way. It was addressed and acknowledged that that's what happened. I did. I don't think though that I shared the part about like my deal of getting out of the Sea organization. That didn't come up later until Julian, when I was having to go through some of my ethics stuff at the AO was with Julian. And I got a whole nother story about Julian, which I can tell you later, about getting my daughter out. And so when I was going along doing my thing as a parishioner, I'd done through OT4, and I still was like, I am not happy. I'm seeing things going on, the excessive things with the money, all of that. My daughter, the one that Scientology wanted me to abort, had turned 14. Sea Org recruiter comes to town. This is a Scientology parent's worst nightmare, at least if you've been in the Sea Org at this point. And they recruit my daughter. And at this point, it's very much expected of me that I'm going to back this up. And what do? If I don't back it up, I get in trouble, I get declared, I lose everybody. If I let it happen, I'm letting my daughter go into the same situation that I was in. And so I talked to the recruiter, who was Brittany. Maybe you know
Brittany
her.
Garrett.
Yes.
Brittany Ruiz now.
Yes. And Brittany lied her ass off and told me how it's completely different. The kids go to school. You know, if you're on the estates project force and you're underage, you need to be in school, you're going to go to school. I
What year was
understand.
this?
Let's see. Shelby would have been 14. So it was, let's see. She was born in 90. So what is that? 2004?
2004. What's your daughter's name?
Shelby. Shelby Lafreniere.
Okay. God, I was at PAC at that time.
Yeah. So she was on the EPF. So Brittany comes to town, and, you know, I'm like on the OT committee at that point. I'm like, you know, pretty much a model Scientologist, but, you know, holding like these secrets of what happened. And so Brittany handled me, but pretty much here's what was in my head. I knew my daughter. I knew who she was. I knew what she was like. I knew she wouldn't make it. I knew she'd want out. I was going to give her like 14 days. Then she'd decide she wanted to leave, and then she'd come back and we can all move on. And that way too, I thought, then at least then she won't be qualified to work at the local organization because she had been in the Sea Org. I'm always using the Sea Org rules to just F them back. Right.
Yeah.
And so I got this all worked out because she was like all gung ho about it because she was totally brainwashed. And I'm like, okay, all right, this is fine. Sure enough, not even 2 weeks, my daughter calls me. She's miserable. She wants out. She wants to leave. I'm like, okay. You need to go tell them you want to leave, get on the routing form. Because Brittany told me if she changed her mind on the estates project force, that it would just be really quick and easy. It's been streamlined and she would be allowed to come home. That was a bunch of complete and utter bullshit. So she calls me. She's my daughter. She's upset. And I'm like, okay, do this. Tell them this. They'll put you on the routing form. I still believed the stuff that they would tell me at this point. I don't know. It's just beyond me, but I did. I believed her. I think Scientologists can be very convincing at times. But in the back of my head, again, I'm like, okay, like my back in my head hustles, like she's not going to make it. She's going to want to leave. I know my daughter. It'll be fine. So I talked to her again. She wasn't on the routing form. And then she said she had to sneak to call me, that she wasn't allowed to call me. She's 14, not in school. School has started. She's not in school. Not only is she not on the routing form, she's still actively on the estates project force. So I'm like, oh, hell no. So I pick up the phone and I talk to the person in charge of the estates project force. And I wish I could remember his name.
Was it Ben Monahan?
Oh, I think his name was Ben. Like maybe curlyish
it was
blonde
motherfucking
hair.
Ben Monahan.
He was
a huge guy.
Yeah. I don't recall huge.
Okay, but Ben's a big guy.
Okay. Like big tall or big rotund?
Big tall.
Okay.
And like farm boy.
Yeah, I would say farm boy. I didn't think he was taller than Julian. Julian's tall.
But Julian's tall.
Yeah.
Ben would be as tall as Julian, but bigger.
Yeah. It could have been. Yeah. I feel like his name was Ben.
The guy I keep joking about on my channel, that if I hate more than anyone else I ever met in the Sea Org, and if I ever see him anywhere, I'm going to punch him right in the face. That's Ben Monahan.
Oh, you're going to love this then. So I get him on the phone. I'm in Minnesota and I'm like, hey, and I'm very diplomatic, and even today, like I'm good at, I think I work in real estate and I can manage other people's emotions and I like to diffuse situations. So I don't start off confrontational. Plus I know how they are. And I'm like, okay, my daughter wants to leave, but I'm curious as to why you don't have her on a routing form, which would be the standard thing to do. Cause I'm like, well, I'll just throw in the policy of what you should be doing. He starts yelling at me. You don't have any rights. She is a Sea Org member. You are a Sea Org member. I'm like, I'm not in the Sea Org anymore. And then he's like, once you're a Sea Org member, you're always a Sea Org member. And I'm just like, whatever. And I'm like, okay, look, you need to put her on the routing form. She doesn't want to be there. She wants to come home. She's 14 years old. She's a minor and she's not in school. And he's like, I don't know who you think you are. You don't have any rights here. I'm like, I am her mother and I have every legal right to go pick her up right now and yank her right out of there. And there's nothing you can do about it. I said, that is the law. And he says to me, the Sea Org doesn't need to follow WOG law. No. He said the Sea Org is above WOG law. And I was like, I just said, you know what? I will see you tomorrow. I'm in Minnesota. He is in LA. And then he starts like, what? You can't come here. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, get my daughter on the routing form because I will be there tomorrow. I book a flight. And remember, like I've done through OT4. I fly out there. I show up on the base. I forgot. I think Julian, of course, was going to be my first stop. I was told because he's the ethics person and I'm this out of control OT, just off the rails, there to get her daughter. So I talked to Julian, who I had worked with when I was doing to get my approvals to do my upper OT levels. Mm-hmm. So he knew who I was. And I'm like, hey, here's the deal, Julian. My daughter's on the EPF. She doesn't want to be there. She wants to leave. Standard thing to do is to put her on a routing form. And I used some choice words. I'm like, this guy over here, not getting her on a routing form, told me the Sea Org's above WOG law. What do you think about that? And, we're in the ethics room where they're recording. There's always cameras in there. And like, he's playing it cool. He's like, okay. And he's like, well, I think, he wants to talk to you. So we'll get him over here and, you guys can talk. And I'm like, okay, sure. So this Ben, the Estates Project Force in charge, comes in. I'm sitting in a chair, facing the door. I don't have the chair because, you always, so they can stop you from leaving. So they always put you on the other side of the table. Yeah. I go in there. I'm on the other side of the table. This Ben guy comes in. He just starts in and just like a lunatic. Now, the people in the Sea Org, I think, became a lot more with this fanatic screaming, yelling. It became so much more commonplace. Mm-hmm. Like a little, I feel like when David Miscavige took over, that's about when it happened, where it got really intense. And so I'm like thinking like, this is crazy. Like I'm a Scientologist in good standing and I am an OT and this guy is like yelling and screaming at me. And then I'm remembering, it's like, I remember like, all right, you think you can out Sea Org me, And so except I'm not going to yell and scream back. Because one thing I learned being a parent, if you really want to make an impact, you speak quietly. You don't yell. You lower your voice and you make them lean in. And that is exactly what I did. And we just start getting into this fight. But it's more him freaking out and I'm more intensely pissed off and telling him off in my own way. And Julian leaves. Julian walks out of the room. But I know Julian is still watching because of the cameras. It's like once this guy started really, we're there. We don't need to follow the WOG law. Like Julian was like, I can't witness this. And he left. But I knew he was watching because after this Ben left, I was so livid. I not in front of Ben. I waited till he left. I was so upset. I then just start crying and I'm like shaking. And then Julian has somebody go take me for a walk. I come back from that walk. I go straight to in the AO in that building when you were there. Wasn't there an RTC office right at the front?
Right on the bottom floor by the elevator. Yeah. Yes.
There's a desk there. You can, write up your reports to RTC. So I go right over there and I start, I think you even could type them then. I put in this whole report about what's happening. Who's that?
That's Ben Monahan.
I feel like he had curly, but this was back in 2004. When was this?
This photo is only a couple years old. He's out of the Sea Org now.
Oh, he is. Is he out of Scientology?
Nope.
Yeah. He got some amends for sure to be making. That could be him because he was a kid to me. But again, this was in 2004. Yeah. So I start flapping to RTC because I'm like, I'm just going to flap all over the place. They don't let me see my daughter. I think I was there for 3 days before I got to see my daughter. They were keeping her from me. And I saw her once briefly I finally got assigned the, I think she might've been the LRH comm or maybe was the RTC rep. She was somebody who had the power to just like move over
The LRH
everybody else.
host.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. The
But
LRH
Natalie,
host.
that would have been my wife, Heather.
Stop.
Yeah, she was the senior LRH host pack. Her office was in AOLA next to the RTC office.
In 2004?
Yeah.
I don't remember her name, but I will say she was nice. I mean,
Was
she
she
wasn't.
skinny and small? I mean, they're all skinny and
Yeah,
small, so.
yeah, cute girl.
I'll show you a photo afterwards.
Yeah, she, she was trying to handle me, and again, like when you've been raised in Scientology and you've been in the Sea Org, you know exactly what they're going to do. So, I play along and I just try to be my diplomatic self. I'm just trying to, my daughter doesn't want to be here. I just kept sticking to that, not all the other stuff, because I knew if I did that, then this would become a bigger situation than it needed to be. And I was just trying to get my daughter and not get declared, because I was trying to not lose my entire family and life in that moment. Because this was before I had decided, I really decided I wanted to leave. So she becomes my handler. She gets my daughter. And somebody else would, like, I was never allowed to be alone with my daughter. And then they tell me she's going to be put on a routing form. So I can go home, she'll do the routing form, and then, we can fly Shelby back. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay here until I have my daughter, and I'm going to fly home with her because she's 14 and I'm her mom. And so, at that point, what are they going to say? So I parked my butt outside her office each day, and I was looking for my daughter. I ran into, because I had done services there, so as a public Scientologist, but I knew a lot of the Sea Org members because I had been, that's where I was in the Sea Org, and so a lot of them were still like, happy to still see me. And so I did some digging around to find out where my daughter was, which group she was with the Estates Project Force, and where was that group. And I found out where they were. They were at a building across the street from Celebrity Center doing renovations. So I get in a cab. I go over there. I go marching straight into the building, and all these, like, these kids on the EPF, and people are like, what are you doing? Right. I'm just like this random person walking in. I walk in and I start asking for my daughter. I find her. I'm like, you need to come with me. No, Mom, I can't. I need to tell my senior. I need to let them know, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, nope. You said you wanted to leave. You should be on the routing form. No. So and finally I said, look, tell him I took you against your will. She was so terrified of getting in trouble. So then I realized, like, I needed her to be more afraid of me. So I just mama beared her. And I'm like, I don't care if you tell them I forced you to do this, but your ass is getting in the cab I have waiting outside. And I took her, and we went to who probably was your wife. And I barged into her office with my daughter, sat down, and I said, she is doing construction work at a site with no safety precautions. I was told she's on this routing form. How is she doing this? And so then she left, and I just kept like pushing, and I think it took close to 2 weeks. And I would literally sit outside the door where the EPF members would come in and out just to try to see her. And I planted myself there, and eventually she was allowed to leave. And then I brought her home and somehow managed to not get declared. But I also knew I'm not going back to the AO and doing another service. I'm not doing any more on the Scientology bridge to total freedom. Like, at that point, I'm like, this is just such BS. And it hasn't changed. It really opened my eyes that it didn't change. So remember, this is the same child who they wanted me to abort. They wanted to take her from me then. Then they tried to take her from me when she was 14. Then, well, they tried it one more time when somehow the rules got changed and she was allowed to work at the org when she got a little bit older. And I was completely against it, but still trying not to get declared. And I said, you need to graduate from high school. No, unless you graduate from high school. So she graduates from high school. She joined staff. They sent her to flag. By then, I have decided that the day I decided once and for all I was going to leave, because Aaron, you probably get this question a lot. What happened that you finally left? What happened that you finally, like, enough was enough? And I had so much of that, but the idea of losing 3 generations of my family, and by then my daughter was getting close to adult age, they could send her anywhere from Flag just to keep her away from me, and they absolutely would have done it. How do I do this? And I hadn't figured it out. And then in 2008, I was in Seattle visiting friends, and I was like, like knowing I wanted to leave, but like I couldn't say anything and da 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 da. And we went to the mall, and there was a mall shooting, and we were there, and we were hiding in the back of a Journey store. And it was in that moment where I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. So I came up with a plan because I knew I would leave, but I knew there's no way I'm not leaving without my family. But if I went and I just said, hey, I'm done, I'm out, screw all of you, I don't know that I would have had my whole family. So I spent 2 years just pretending to still be a good Scientologist and attend my OT committee meetings, which again are like PTA for Scientologists, and do these things and just to try and pretend, because she was in Florida. She was at Flag and she turned 18, which means I no longer could just legally, yank her out of wherever I wanted. And in that 2 years, I was able to determine that my mom wanted to leave. My husband was willing to leave. My daughter's my middle daughter's biological dad, baby daddy, and his wife were going to leave. So we were all like, okay, the only missing person was Shelby, and she was at Flag. And I can't leave without her. If I left without her, I never would have seen her again. They would have sent her out of the country to keep her away from me. So my first husband, Dan, he knew about this whole thing. And he said, well, we were going to take this trip to Mexico for Christmas. So we came up with a whole plan that we would get her out, because she was allowed to go to Flag to train only if they knew ahead of time she was going to be leaving at this future date to go on this trip that was planned for a long, long, long time. And so I used the trip. And so we got her a ticket, but didn't tell her the right flight information, didn't tell her that it was a one-way ticket to Minnesota. She thought it was round trip. I gave her incorrect flight information in case they figured it out before she got to the airport. I sent, it was my daughter's bio dad. It was his wife who helped me. I sent her a cell phone and I said, give it to Shelby, tell her it's for Christmas and that it's a new one, because that way but don't give it to her till you're about to get her on the plane, because I don't want anyone in Florida having the number. So we got rid of her other phone till Shelby, my little daughter, is, brainwashed as all get out, thinking she's going to, go to Mexico, come back, go back to Flag. What I found out later is the church was catching on that I was disaffected, which is what they call it, that I was starting to pull away. Like I was really having a hard time, not letting them know like how sick of this that I was. And so Shelby was prepped before they let her leave. They actually weren't going to let her leave at one point. A couple days before, she called me crying and she's like, I'm not going to go, but I'm making the choice not to go. And I'm like, no. And every time she called me, there was somebody there. She wasn't allowed to talk to me alone. She was doing her studies and then having to sell basic books. She was on her feet so much, supervising the course rooms there, even though that's not what she was supposed to be doing. When she came home, she had these problems with varicose veins. She was just a teenager. The doctor said he'd never seen something like that in somebody so young. It's because she was on her feet so much. And so my daughter's stepmom gives her the phone. But Shelby had already been told, your mom and your grandma, we think they're a little disaffected. My mom had gone and gotten baptized. This is like before, because she was at this point, she's just pushing buttons. She's like, oh yeah, I got baptized. Of course, we're non-denominational, right? I can have a relationship with God and practice Scientology, right? Isn't that what you say? So my mom goes and gets baptized. And this was brought up to my daughter as this huge outpoint. Your grandma's on solo knots and she got baptized. And your mom, this was one of the things they told my daughter to prove what an a-hole I was. Your mom and your stepdad went out on a date night instead of going to an org event. And, in hindsight, that's probably how they knew I was kind of disaffected because I didn't even care. I was like, no, I'm not going to that. Like, I wasn't even making excuses anymore. I'm like, no, but I would do it like this, like, no, we're going to go out to dinner. Like we have a date, that kind of a thing. So Shelby comes home. I immediately, in the airport on the way home, I start telling her David Miscavige beats his staff. All like this stuff. Because it was after, well, it must have been after Mike came out. After he left the Sea Org. Marty for sure. No, Mike wasn't out. Mike wasn't public yet.
2009 is when they did the Tampa Bay Times thing.
Okay. So it was,
know what I mean?
Yeah. So it was before, it was right before, it was right about that time. And we ended up sending her to Mexico. She's pissed at me. I'm ruining her life because, she's going to be disqualified because now she's a potential trouble source. But we had the whole plan. So she goes to Mexico. The local church still tracked her down, tried to get her to agree to move out of the house and move in with one of the staff members. And I was going to leave quietly. I was just going to take my family and go. I was just going to go. It was late. Oh, that's my daughter. Hey, Shelby.
So late 2009, that would have been after the Tampa Bay Times articles, because that's the first time it really publicly hit the airwaves that David Miscavige was beating people up.
Yeah. Yep. It was out there.
Hi, Shelby.
Shelby. So Shelby goes to Mexico, comes back. She's pissed at me. And I'm like, hey, you want to go back? Get a job. I am not paying for a ticket for you to go back. And I'm not sending you any more money while you're there either. So she's like, at one point, I think her plan was to kind of get a job and then go back. But we just kept we got her, she got a job working with my brother-in-law. I got her to a couple doctors, and little by little, she started sleeping and eating and coming around and realizing that this is not worth losing her family over, because she knew we were all leaving. And in the beginning, I think she felt forced, like she was being forced to leave. But eventually it became her own. And she realized, yes, this is not good. And she found her own truth in that. And that is why I ended up speaking out. Like I said, I remember telling the ethics person who is now in the Sea organization, and I think she's in OSA. Her name's Karen Wessling. And she is the one who tried to get my daughter to move out and move in with her so she could stay in the church. And again, like OSA, I would have left quietly, except Karen interfered with that, tried to get my daughter to move out, and they were trying to get her back to flag. So again, being, I'm an ex-Sea Org member, I know what the rules are. I need to disqualify her for going to flag. So I'm super proud. Oh, thank you, Shelby. You're going to make me cry. Let me get through it. So I write this whole letter because I knew what I needed to do. I had to threaten to sue the church, because if I threaten to sue the church, she can't be on the base. So I write this whole thing. I have it like message to the HGB building in LA. I threatened to sue the church, David Miscavige. I just go off on this whole thing. So immediately my daughter's labeled as a potential trouble source. Because when Shelby was still thinking she wanted to go back, she kept saying well, I need to talk to my ethics officer. And I kept, putting the block on that. And then at one point I'm like, okay, go ahead, call. And then they wouldn't call her back because she was on the no-fly list because her mother had threatened, RTC, David Miscavige, to take legal action. So that at least stopped them trying to take her, so I could have some time to put my family together. This is like a big deal. We're all leaving together. And it was at a time where, people were just starting to come out and kind of, no, that's not true. People were whistleblowing for years before, but it was more in the media. It was becoming a little bit more mainstream at that time. So when they did that with my daughter, then they send 2 Sea Org members out to handle me. And I'm,
After all this.
Yeah. They're they wanted me to, they fly in and they rent this hotel room and they rent this meeting room there. None of this was on the orgs lines. I forget who they were, but that was their job. They were flying around handling people like me. Oh gosh, I got their names somewhere.
Oh, hold on.
They were a team.
it wasn't Angie Blankenship or, I mean, it wasn't Monique Yingling, right?
I don't think
She would have
so.
been
No,
a
these
lawyer,
were
but not
Sea
a
Org
Sea Org member.
members. Yeah.
It wouldn't have been Jenny DeVocht or Jenny Linson.
No, I would have remembered that.
Okay.
I just remember one of them being like, I think was in charge of some ethics. I mean, obviously they were on a project because there were so many people popping
Two women?
up. Two women, younger
Wow.
than me. So we go in
If I
this.
see any names pop up in the live chat, I'll pull them up. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
we go in this room at this hotel in not far from the airport here in the Twin Cities. And my people I knew were like, why would you take that meeting? And my non-Scientology friends were like, what if they take you? And I got to be straight. I thought about it because they're meeting me at a hotel and I'm thinking like, would they go as far as kidnapping me? And then I was like, why would you even want me back? Like I'm, I'm like hard. Like I keep saying Dunder Mifflin level. But for me, it was about closure. For me, I needed to face them and be able to confront them and be able to hold my position in space, as they like to say, and not be intimidated. I needed that. So I felt for me like it was some type of closure. So I'm like, yeah, I'll meet with you. So I go to the meeting and they do the whole thing where they lay out the policy and they've already highlighted my suppressive acts. And I'm getting excited while I'm sitting there, but I'm trying to hide it. Because I'm like, oh, I'm going to get the whole, like I read about this on the internet. I'm like, I wonder if there's videos. I hope it's my good side. And they're just like, and so it's a suppressive act and like waiting for that impactful. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds like it. And they're just trying to handle me to get me to go. I think they wanted me to go to LA for a handling, go see Julian. And I'm like, no, I've decided I'm done with Scientology and I'm leaving and my family's leaving. And it was just threat. We're going to, here's what was interesting. They did more like they would highlight things or have it written on this piece of paper that they would show me, but they wouldn't say it, which made me think like, is the room bugged? Or am I being punked? Is Ashton Kutcher going to jump out?
They were worried that you were recording it.
Oh, you're probably right. Yeah, because they didn't let me keep anything there. And I let this go on because I felt like I needed to be able to, I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to argue. I just want to be there as me and I want to face them and I want to hear what they have to say. And I want to be able to recognize that I'm not doing that and that I'm saying no. I just wanted to be there to say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm leaving and just, stand my ground on that. And I did, and they left. And then they flew to Seattle to handle a friend of mine who was, not wanting to disconnect. They started the Natalie tour where let's find everybody she might be connected to and tell them just how horrible she is and all that. And the local organization in the Twin Cities did the same thing. And in the process, lost 2 more families because when they pulled these people in to say, here's why you need to disconnect from Natalie. She's this, she's that, blah, 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 blah. They knew me. And they both told me they knew. They were like, if they were saying these things about you, they're like, I mean, I was a very dedicated Scientologist but more so I was kind to people. And they knew me on a personal level. And so they knew it couldn't be true. And it really turned them off. So they ended up leaving too. So there were other people that left as well. And then we ended up, there was other stuff that went on after that with some harassment and stuff, especially when Mike came to town. I hosted we were having these like Sea Org reunions. Might have been before your time. I don't know.
Probably. Right I wasn't officially declared until 2014.
Oh, okay. No, it was before. We had one in like Texas. That's when Lawrence, the Going Clear guy, was writing his book.
Larry Wright, yeah.
Lawrence Wright. So he was there as an author interviewing a lot of these ex-Sea Org members. Like a bunch of people with, Marty was there. This was before Marty is doing whatever he's doing today.
Yeah.
Mike was there. So many ex-Sea Org members. It was so great because we had these group and we did it in Texas. I hosted one in Minnesota We went up to a resort in Minnesota, and what was so great about it is it's a group of people that have never been allowed to communicate, have never been allowed to fill in the blanks on anything. We could fill in the blanks. And I did the same thing. I went to Seattle and I connected with the exes there because I had lived there and set the record straight on some stuff. And I remember meeting with Bonnie. Oh my gosh, my hard drive is full. Bonnie, her daughter is Amy Scobie, but her mom Bonnie was in the Sea Org and she was on staff in Seattle. And it was before Bonnie died. Bonnie ended up passing away. I had the best conversation with her because when we were in Seattle, Bonnie was behind some of the because I'm like, who's ratting me out to LA on the stuff that I'm doing? And it was Bonnie. It was Bonnie, and it was the DSA, who's the local OSA person, and Pierce. This was in Seattle, and Bonnie Elliott. Yeah. I was able to put together so many of the pieces, and I got to see it was Tony DePhillips and his wife because they were out, and just really fill in the blanks on a lot. And then from there, we were out. There were some harassment, especially when I would talk about it, because I did do a story with the Tampa Bay Times about coerced abortion back in, I think, 2010. That's the same one that Claire did. Actually, Shelby did it with me. That was a trip. My daughter, we went to Florida. Ooh, we were contacted.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That is some Inception level stuff right there.
Oh yeah. Once again, I was going to leave quietly. I just wanted to get on with my life, but I had it with this coming at my family thing. So even when I had my family together, I didn't want to stop there.
I was in the exact same boat. I literally was in flag in the ethics office on the cans with the ethics officer until he eventually gave up and let me put the cans down. And I said, we don't have to do this messy.
Yeah.
You can stop trying to insist that I disconnect from my mom. I'll just declare me PTS. I'll still off into the sunset. You'll never hear from me again.
Yeah.
If you ever get a report of me ever spreading any black PR to any Scientologist, declare me on the spot. You don't have to create war.
Yeah.
And apparently they wanted war, but they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves.
No, they can't. Even when you're not being I was not going at them. It was very much so coming this way. And I was trying to hey, I'm not trying to have a battle here. But at the point where it was oh, you want to do this? I will do this. And part of it too was I felt for my daughter, it was her opportunity to speak out. The child who should have never been born, who they tried to take at 14, who they tried to take again at 18. Well, now here she is at 19, ready to spill the beans. And we
actually,
went
if Shelby's still in the chat, can you just confirm for me that your EPFIC was Ben Monahan, or was it Lon Cloughlin? Lon was I think Lon later he was the senior INR. He might have later become the EPFIC. I'm not sure. But
yeah,
Shelby,
see if you remember.
Was your EPFIC Ben Monahan or Lon Cloughlin? Ben sounds more familiar.
Yeah, okay. I knew his name was Ben.
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely Ben. There's only one Ben who was an EPFIC.
Wow. Yeah, that guy created some enemies. And my whole interaction with him too. It's I went from wanting to just leave Scientology, leave the Sea Org, leave Scientology and leave it alone to becoming an enemy of Scientology.
Yeah.
Not because of it, because of these things that they just kept doing. So when Shelby and I went to Florida, we flew out there to go meet with the Tampa Bay Times. And I was so paranoid too, because it was, I think it was 2010. And, we were kind of newly out. And it was Tom Tobin, who was the, at the newspaper when your job editor, he was the editor. I think he met us at the airport and I'm like, can I see your ID? And he showed me his ID and we went to a hotel and we were talking about how this was going to go, where we were going to do the interviews. And there was a PI in the lobby and he's like, yep. And I said, well, what do they do? And he's like, they let you know they're there. But, otherwise, what are they going to do? Follow you around, whatever. So there was this big guy, and I remember thinking he looked like Hulk Hogan because he was so big. And he walks right by me and he's like, "Hi." And so of course I'm like, "Hi." And then he just walks off. And we do these interviews, and it was intense because, it was sharing a lot of things that were in, I don't know that that the videos are still online. My last name was Hagamo back then. So if you go Tampa Bay Times, Natalie Hagamo, I know the article's still there, but we did these videos. I couldn't even finish Shelby's video. Oh, even now thinking about it. Oh, now I'm going to make Shelby cry. How many years later, and it's like, I could not, I still can't watch it. I can barely read the article because it's just still so, there, and they're still doing it. And interestingly, it's like, I feel like I have an easier time, and maybe you can relate to this, Erin, and I don't feel bad crying because you cry all the time. And I love you for it. But I was like, I can speak for myself. I can share my story. And I have times where I'm more upset about it. And I have times where I can just share it like I'm telling you about the weather. But when it comes to other people, when it comes to my daughter's pain, when it comes to other ex-Sea Org members and what they go through, then I lose it. Then it's really hard. And I don't know why that is. You'd think it would be more just, my own stuff. But I think that's kind of part of that Sea Org mentality too. It's like you're, well, at least for me, I can focus when it comes to my own battles, my own things I struggle with. But hearing somebody else's, pain like that is just watching your child. I'm not even going to try and fight it. I'm just going to cry. It's probably what gets most of us out when people ask, "How did you finally leave? What was the thing that finally happened?" And for both of us, it's our children. Something happens. They either try to take your child or hurt your child. But when you see, it's like even going through it, and I knew what she was going through was very different from watching this video. I wasn't in the room when she gave her interview. They asked us, and I'm like, no. I said, I don't. I would rather not be in the room. And I don't remember, Shelby, you have to say if she was okay with me being in the room. I remember not wanting to be there. And I wanted her to feel comfortable and be able to share her story and be able to share her point of view. But I watched that video one time. I don't think that I even finished it. And I don't know if they still have it online. I just know that the article is. And I don't remember having a problem with you being there. And then it was definitely me who said I didn't want to be in the room when she shared that. But I watched it later. And even though these things that happen, it's just when you see someone sharing that and then knowing that, and this is part of why too, that was in 2010. I went on with my life after that. I got a divorce. I went on and created a whole new life. I've been happy. I have my struggles, but overall, for the first time, I think in my life, the last several years, I am happy. Doesn't mean shit doesn't happen. Stuff still happens. Life happens, but I'm happy. I'm happy and I feel free. I can read a book at 2:00 in the afternoon if I wanted to. I struggle with it, but I could and I can. And knowing that I have my family out. Other people don't have their families out. Other people don't have contact with their parents, with their own children. And that is like, I think the part where I'm like, okay, I want to talk about this and I want to share about it and I want to hear other people's stories about it because it does help me process it. And my neurologist said I need to feel my feelings. So I'm just going to be upset. It's how do you not then still say something? It's just, I just needed some time. So David Miscavige, OSA Church of Scientology. If you thought I was just done and I wasn't going to say anything anymore, I just needed some time. And it's just, this is still going on. It is still happening and something needs to be done about it. And things are being done about it. And one thing I really want to say, all of you people who have never been in Scientology and who are on these channels and commenting and sharing and doing other YouTubes about it, you are my freaking heroes. Honestly, when I saw how many people who were never in Scientology showing more compassion. Oh my God, I sound like Aaron. Sorry, Aaron, I got to tease you. Showing more compassion than I've ever seen. That really opened my eyes even more that there are good people. And these younger people, this younger generation of, millennials, especially the Gen Zs, I'm just blown over by the amount of compassion some of them have and show and understanding. And that's something that I've aspired to and have worked at getting better at, because as a child in Scientology, that's drilled out of you. You're taught to not feel compassion. You're taught to not have empathy, especially in the Sea Org. And those are those formative years where you're learning these things. And when you're in the Sea organization at any time, but especially as a young person, you were drilled and taught to not have compassion, not have an understanding, and not have empathy. Because what if you had to investigate your best friend? What if you had to do an ethics handling on your spouse or someone you were close to? That's why they destroy relationships. And we're all stronger together, even though I think most of it, well, I can speak for myself. I'm just like figuring it out. I'm just figuring it out. I don't have it figured out. It's sometimes I feel like I'm just a hot mess in a dress. And other times I feel like, okay, I've got life and these things are going pretty well. And they are. But it's kind of what brought me to, like even joining you now and sharing all this. So much of what I've told you, I've never talked about before. Oh, crap. I just realized I didn't tell. So much of this I haven't told my children who now know. But, when I started doing the podcast, which my podcast, Tonka Talk, is about community and connection in where I live, sharing the way people create community and connection. But every Friday I share my story because that has everything to do with why I'm so obsessed with this, the idea of community and connection. And my kids have been listening. My kids are adults. My kids, Shelby's 33. My other daughter's 31. My son is 25. None of this has been hidden from them. They lived through a lot of it, but these details, especially things about growing up and about my mom, they're learning on the podcast. My sister is joining me on Fridays. We're talking about these things for the first time. We're recording the conversation and throwing it up as a podcast episode because this is just how we're processing it. This is just how we're going to do it. And I've talked to my kids and I've said, I'll be saying things and sharing things. I don't remember what I told you and I didn't tell you. But no, you're adults now. I've been waiting for my children to grow up. My mom has passed away. And the only reason that's relevant, she would completely have supported me. But my mom would feel so guilty because she already did. The last 2 years when she left Scientology before she died, that was a big thing. I'm so sorry. She was so sorry that she got us into Scientology. But, now I'm going to Oprah ugly cry. But as I told her, it's like, hey, it all, it's, do you get this question often, Aaron? Sometimes people ask me, someone asked me this recently, do you hate them? Do you hate the Sea Org? Do you hate Scientology? I'm like, no, hate is a strong word for me. Hate does not describe it. Because to me, it's almost like the energy it takes to hate something or someone is a lot of energy. And I'm not putting my energy there. I rather use that in sharing these stories, in sharing my own story, in getting it out there, in talking about it, in making it conversation the way that you have, that so many have, that so many way before, back in the day when they were in these chat rooms and message rooms and using fake names and communicating and sharing these things to let other people know who are like people who lurk on your channel who are probably still Scientologists, letting them know that you're not alone in this. We saw the same thing. Because when you take your concerns and your complaints to Scientology, where you think maybe they'll do something about this, the reaction you get is that it's you. You're committing crimes. You're doing something against the church. So every person who speaks out and share these stories, there's like a Scientologist somewhere who maybe is lurking and going, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. This did happen. This does happen. And then for every non-Scientologist, I swear, I wish I could just like hug every one of you. For all of you non-Scientologists, you never end, you keyboard warriors. I love every single one of you because you, like I said, you continue to show more compassion and understanding for people like me, Aaron, other people than I've ever seen. You know, you'd expect, don't you think, like in Scientology that, oh, it's this religion and you'd end up with all this care. That's just not the case. Does it blow you away, Aaron, the number of people never in Scientology who are doing more to help me, my family, than anyone else, than anybody else?
Oh yeah. It's why, oh, I was about to let a secret slip. I'm not going to. The name of the new foundation is going to reflect the fact that the viewers of these channels are the ones who are supporting people who leave Scientology.
Yeah.
The people who've never been in Scientology,
Mhm.
who watch our channels and support us and support what we do and support people helping to expose the fraud and the abuse and how high control groups work. And, you know, it's how abusive relationships work. The relationship between Scientologists and Scientology is just like being in an abusive relationship. And I think that's one of the things that make people connect with the stories of former Scientologists is whether you've never had anything to do with Scientology, there's aspects of these stories that resonate with you, that you connect with.
Yeah.
And
that's so true. That's so true. I just have so much freaking gratitude.
Yeah.
For those people.
When people ask if I hate, you know, Scientology or Scientologists, for the most part, I feel bad for them.
Yeah.
Because I know that they either really believe what they believe and they're being deluded and conned to and lied and they have no idea, or I know that they've already opened their eyes and they're stuck in.
Yeah. There's
like
a lot of people. Yeah.
You know, because of the family stuff. And so for most of them, I feel bad for them. And for David Miscavige, I just feel bad for him that he has me to deal with.
I think that I've told people, I said, I feel like there's two types of people in Scientology today that are there. They're the ones that are stuck there, that they want out, that are secretly watching this channel, that are secretly reading things on the internet and trying to come up with an exit plan. And there are hardcore, I feel like there's a percentage, and I think they're the smaller percentage of people who are like David Miscavige, where you're just evil. It's just evil. You are evil. But more of the people, so many of the people that I knew in Scientology and even in the Sea Org were there because they believed in something. They thought they were doing something for the good of the planet. The sacrifices that they made, the time away from their family, the zero self-care, stuff like that, was because they thought they were doing something that was larger than themselves. And that idea and that concept, I think, is admirable. That's a huge level of dedication, but they don't know, because let me tell you, after I dry my nose, Scientologists don't know. The ones that aren't looking, they don't know about the abuses that David Miscavige has perpetuated. They don't know. They don't know about the coerced abortions. They don't know about the physical beatings. They don't know about so much of this. They don't know about even the earlier lies of L. Ron Hubbard about his history and his career, because they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to read anything. And I can remember the first moments, I don't know if you can, I'd love to hear, when I actually went to the ex-Scientology message board on the internet. Somehow it came up in a search. And when I went in there, I was terrified that I was going to be found out. I was so paranoid. but it was the most truthful thing I think I've ever experienced, because it was that moment where I would go down to the basement and hide, because I didn't want my husband at the time to know. He didn't know for 2 years. For 2 years, I was on the internet like, and reading all of these things and these stories. And that's when like Jeff Hawkins was doing his blog, and it was coming out in real time. We didn't have YouTube then. So you had to depend on a blog or a post here, and to see that, this is, I'm not crazy. This is abusive. This is wrong. And when I first left, there weren't many people who were never in Scientology that paid any attention. I had very good friends who I did share some of my story, nothing like what I just diarrheaed of the mouth tonight, but where I told them some of it, my friends outside of Scientology, after Scientology Aftermath came out and they started watching it, I had multiple of them come back to me and say, I kind of didn't believe you because it was so crazy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But then they see it, Scientology Aftermath. That's why these programs are so important. That's why these YouTube channels are so important, that you reach this younger generation. They're going to be easier to get these messages because of the internet. And you can't shut down YouTube channels the way that you can, where they just interfere with somebody's business or whatever. Another one will pop out. They cannot play whack-a-mole here.
Or Natalie, even TV shows. There was another TV show called Disconnected that was hosted by Jamie DeWolf, L. Ron Hubbard's great-grandson. A&E had a problem. They couldn't air both shows. They had to pick a show, which one they were going to air. Now, there were other problems with the Disconnected show that contributed to making that decision an easy decision. But my point there being, no one has to pick which YouTube channel gets to upload videos. Yeah. Everyone gets to upload as many videos as they want, whenever they want, talk to whoever they want, talk about whatever they want. It's a different thing. And not only can Scientology not control it, but the networks can't control it. The lawyers can't control it.
Yeah, they can't. And then you have what's been so interesting to me is watching the number of YouTube creators who were never in Scientology, whose YouTube channels are not specifically about Scientology, that are now covering it, that are now talking about it. And this is a lot where I'm saying like that compassion, seeing the way that they respond to it, or seeing, what really is something that was wrong and abusive. If it weren't for my friends outside of Scientology, and I don't know how many times I would just blurt something out that happened, not thinking it was even that bad. And the reaction was like, what? And now people close to me know me enough to say, that was wrong now, right? And I'm like, yeah, now I do. But I didn't know. I didn't know that abuse wasn't a word that we used. It wasn't like, oh, I'm being abused, because you can't be a victim in Scientology. And that's part of why when I left Seattle after my sexual assault and that whole thing, the cover up of it, when I left, I realized that I rather my ex-friends on staff in Seattle think this was my Sea Org mentality. Okay. This is not how I feel today. But in that moment, I was okay with them thinking, because the Sea Org told them that I had an affair and that's what happened. And that's why I was kicked out of the Sea Org. I rather have those people think that I was a whore than a victim, because you're not allowed to be a victim. You're not allowed. You get in trouble for it. Even being sick.
Yeah.
My favorite thing now is when I get bronchitis and I'm like, it doesn't matter.
It took me years to stop in the heat of a sickness to feel like I've done so many bad things. I've done so many bad things. I've done so many bad things. And I wasn't even someone who really believed in the whole PTS tech. To me, it was a very circular logic. It all seemed like bullshit, but I still couldn't shake just that internal monologue of, oh my God, all the things I've done. Oh my God, all the things I've done, because otherwise, why would you be sick?
Yeah. It's very much too in the world outside of Scientology. It's also interesting because, when we first started chatting, we talked a lot about, this idea of judgment. And my perspective from my reality of having been grown up in Scientology, the Sea Org, the whole thing, and then spending the last 13 years, really 10 years, because for me, truly leaving Scientology happened after my divorce. Because my husband was in Scientology. That was kind of what held us together. And I was much earlier in. Sometimes when people leave Scientology, it happens gradually. And that's what happened with us. He was willing to leave the organization, but not the religion. So when we did a joint announcement and it was more that we remained Scientologists, even though that's not where I was at. But that's where he needed to be in that moment, was that the church is corrupt. David Miscavige is corrupt. It's not LRH. And by then I was already like, L. Ron Hubbard is a con man. This is a cult every day, all day. What resonated with me in Scientology and kept me going, and where I had gains and where I got something from it, were universal truths that you can find many other places and for free without any money. You don't need to do hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of counseling to have this realization that, I could have read in a self-help book.
Right.
Yeah. It's different. But I think you'll find that people, even outside of Scientology, sometimes still judge each other. So I think sometimes we run into this thing of like, well, this person's behaving that way or they're behaving that way. And, not everything is because somebody was in a cult. I work through things when I'll learn to use the TikTok. So I am on the TikTok now.
Oh.
Yeah, I just I've watched the videos, but I'm Gen X, but sometimes I identify as a boomer. But I am on TikTok and I'm watching the videos and stuff, and it just blows my mind how like the speed in which you can share these little bits and things of information and to be able to communicate it. Like that's why I love too that you'll do little things on TikToks, like sharing about the videos and things like that. We live in a world where communication happens very fast and it happens very rapidly. And sometimes something has to be repeated. And that's what I think where these YouTube channels come in and why I want to do one, because things just need to be, they need to be repeated. They need to be continuing to be gotten out there. And there's been so much done like that. And I'm just amazed at my guy, Tony, and I, like I said, we watch. My partner I'm with a man who's never been in Scientology. And I have only had 2 relationships outside of Scientology. Everybody else was in the cult. And in my experience with him, and in seeing, like, again, like on TikTok, you see all these videos about Gen X and what Gen X people are like. I've even had realizations that, that quirk or that thing isn't from the cult. That's just my generation. They kind of play together. And I think especially with people my age who are having these, I have these grown adult children and stuff that are old enough to be interacting with all of this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first started doing videos, I sort of had the idea that, once I do a video about this subject, like it will have been done and it will have been said and people will know it. And I'm like, what a stupid way of thinking. Like even my own favorite YouTube channels, I probably watch 10% of what they do. Right. And I go, and no matter, I've got 220,000 subscribers. There's 2.5 billion people on YouTube. Yeah. My point in saying all this is I could literally do the same video every single day and I'd be reaching new people with that. And 20 channels could do the same video about Scientology every single day and new people would be being reached every single time. That's the glorious thing about this platform. I say the internet has no memory. Nobody cares what you did 2 days ago. Maybe my hardcore viewers have seen most of my videos, but for the most part, nobody cares and everyone's forgotten what you did 2 days ago. You could do it again and reach brand new people.
Yeah. And share it. And there's no shortage of things to share. And I think it's really neat. I find it really interesting too, in watching some of the YouTube creators who now are also talking about Scientology and other cults as well. And I really think that the whole with Scientology, because Scientology is a cult, people have known it's a cult for a long time. And especially like after that Tampa Bay Times article. So that 2009, 2010, with the advent of social media, with being able to reach so many more people, it gets out and it gets out. But sometimes I'm still surprised at like how so many people still have not heard about it, or they've heard about it a little bit. But I feel like cults is kind of a hot topic right now, not just Scientology, but many. And personally, I think it's because as I feel like as a whole, there's like kind of this bit of waking up going on to that we are surrounded by cults. And I have often felt and told people, like I said earlier, everybody's got a cult. You've got your cult. Unless you have no issues at all, like you got no issues. You got nothing you want to work on. There's nothing about yourself that would change. There's always something in there. And I think that's why if we just stop judging each other about it, a lot of Scientologists that I knew, part of them not coming forward, not coming out is because of the shame. They feel shame about it. They feel, especially people who weren't born in it, who walked in as an adult and made a conscious choice to do this. There's shame there. I know people who, I had one person tell me like, I can't admit it was a cult because then I'd have to admit that I gave into a lie. And that's the thing. It's not that all of it is a lie, because there are some universal truths in Scientology that are helpful because they're universal truths, like gravity. L. Ron Hubbard did not create that or find that or discover it. He codified his own system for dealing with things. But many of these natural truths, that's why back in the day, were you at PAC in LA when the Secret got banned? There were banned books.
I was already out of so I was out of the Sea Org. It was about 2006, 2007 when The Secret was becoming very popular. And oh yeah, no, you weren't allowed to do that. Before that, there was a book called The Gods of Eden that got banned. Do you remember that?
Oh, that sounds familiar.
It was about how the gods of Eden are really aliens.
Yes. I remember some Sea Org members getting in trouble for that. They got the book and they were kind of like doing a little book club thing, and they came down on them. Anything that's not source. When my daughter Shelby was training in Florida, I remember her telling me how she used to like secretly read Twilight under her blanket because you weren't allowed to read other books. And maybe it was Harry Potter. I don't know if I got that straight. It was Twilight or it was Harry Potter. You just the more you tell people that, you can't look at this, how in this day and age with the internet, especially with social media in your face and not being you can't always control what shows up in your feed. I would love to hear from like a Scientologist who's like, what do you do? Do you just scroll past it? Do you watch it?
Right.
Like what happened in your brain that like, this isn't okay?
Yeah. No, a lot of under the radar people are watching SPTV, and that's all the more reason why we need 100 more people doing it. So that all the under the radar people not only are watching our videos, but they're watching people who they used to know. Because Scientology is so small. You get 100 of us doing this. Everyone knows one of us.
Yeah. You were exactly right about that. And I think it's good for them to know and see too that it's not the easiest thing to do to revisit a lot of this, obviously, and share a lot of this. But I feel, and I'm not saying like, okay, to process it, everybody should get on YouTube or do a podcast and talk about it. That's me. That's kind of how I'm a verbal processor. And that's how I do it. That's what's working for me. That's what I feel like. I have this commitment. I know I have to do this thing on Friday. And my sister and I are talking about it. It's like, I know I'm not just going to blow it off because I told people that I'm going to do it. It's kind of like if you want to lose weight or get in shape and you get on Facebook, you're like, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. There could be some accountability to kind of keep going with that. But they do. I was an under the radar Scientologist, secretly looking at things on the internet.
Yeah, I was for years and years and years. I'm posting a link in the live chat to Natalie's YouTube channel. And for those of you watching, Tonka Talk, at Tonka Talk. Tonka Talk, Lake Minnetonka Community and Connection is Natalie's YouTube channel. Her podcast is the exact same name anywhere where you get your podcasts. I hope let's do a lot of videos together in the future. There's so many chats that we can have, including.
Oh, totally. Believe it or not, I haven't even told you everything.
Is Julian Schwartz the most evil person in Scientology, or is it someone else? Or is there another side to Julian Schwartz? Is there the kinder, gentler side? we'll dive deep in a later episode.
I often wondered like what would be going. Sometimes I would look at him and think like, because Julian, his job at the advanced organization was handling a lot of people like me when you were doing your upper levels, handling their ethics. And he, for some of that stuff, he was pretty like laid back about it, but you know, he knows everything. He knows where the bodies are buried. How do you, at some point, if you have any bit of human decency in you, there is a point, and then that's where the mind control comes in, because you start developing a conscience or some empathy, and you immediately have to, get your TRs in, or just like suck it back in and just snap out of it like that. I wonder if what goes through his head. I'm dying for him to leave and just to be able to be like, oh, okay, so what about this? What about that? What about these
I don't
things?
think they can ever let him leave. But even that is an interesting thought experiment. Like, okay, if they can never let him leave, then what happens when he insists on it? What happens then? Or do they send him off to some Sea Org resort where he'll never want to leave because they're just going to put him out to pasture and send him down to Cabo San Lucas at some resort to live out the rest of his life? Who knows? But they got to keep that boy on sides. If he gets in the hand of the feds, Scientology really is going down.
Yeah, and that might actually happen. I mean, just eventually, there's, like you said, if enough people come out, talk, share about it.
Yeah. Wow, this might be the longest chat I've ever done on this channel.
See, I told you, when I do something, I'm the best at it.
And my bladder is about to explode.
So yes, you need to go to the bathroom.
To end it there, guys. I'm not going to do the super chats just because it's already been almost 4 hours and I'm literally about to explode. Yeah, we've been 3 hours 45 minutes.
Oh my god!
I know.
Most of the way through, I forgot that. Like, I thought it was, that I forget people are watching.
Yeah,
you got to do a couple questions though. I love when you do that.
Oh, okay. Let's do some.
Look really good. If you can hold it.
My OT powers here. Okay. From the early chat, you look like Janine Garofalo, says Ed LeBond. I'm not gonna pull up all of them, guys. Let's see here. Okay, Telperion. Once in a while, someone utters a sentence no one in history has ever said before. After my mom married grandpa, things got weirder. That's after you introduced the assassin of John Lennon to the Church of Scientology. Hold on to the movie rights. Let's see. Melissa's not sure about this. Says, Natalie, you're so well spoken. I love the idea that community is important and there's so much good in the world.
Yep, it is very important for me. And that's one thing I know as I continue to talk about this and want to create a YouTube channel, another one separate from Tonka Talk, to really talk specifically about this. I think it's important for people to understand what happens afterwards, that it's not, it's you go through what you go through, but you can create a life and find people that where you have true connection and community with. And there are kind people out there that are willing to help you and to listen. And I think some of it with some people that I've met where I've been shocked that sometimes I expect to get this judgment and they don't. And I've thought, like, I wonder why. And I think it's because I'm such a cautionary tale. Like, my crazy life makes them feel really normal. And I am okay with that.
Oh my God, I love that. Karen McCourt says, Aaron, great guest tonight. Natalie, you are a strong, amazing woman. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Karen. Your name sounds familiar.
Regarding Telperion, regarding the road to recovery, can something be an illness if no one suffers? If you're happy and you don't make others unhappy, why change? Normal is a spectrum. Let your freak flag fly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen to that. There's a book that written by this guy named Sadhguru, I think is how you say it. He's like a guru kind of guy. It's called Karma. And I read that and I loved it. And it just really helped me understand too that we don't need to suffer our suffering, especially when I went through my physical situation with a lot of pain and all that. And it's hard not to get kind of sucked into that mentally. But in reading this book, and I'm like, oh, we don't need to suffer our suffering. We can, even with this, it doesn't mean you can't, not everything has to be this just like, shit show.
Wow. Hey, guy, the guy who assaulted you,
Yeah.
did he go on to become a famous actor?
I wouldn't say he went on to be a famous actor. He was in a very specific, and the reason why I don't share this is I can tell you exactly who he is. He died. And I remember for so many years, and I still I am like next level about locking the doors and locking the windows. And I don't feel I feel more safe than I did before. It's something I work on, but I tell Tony often, I'm like, I don't have that sense of safety often where I really feel like I'm safe ever since that happened. And the reason why I never said who he was, nor do I intend to, is because he has children. And just because their dad did this, and I know there's no way I was the first one and the only one, because he was pretty skilled and, kind of like his protocol with it. There's no reason why they need to suffer that. There's no reason. And when I found out, he died young too. I think he had some type of illness. And when I found out that he died, you think when somebody hurts you like that, when that happens, and you think you want them to go to jail or you want them to suffer, maybe you think even that you want them to die. I was more upset with the church because what he did to me was physical. What they did to me was mental and spiritual and cuts in a different way. I have a high pain tolerance for physical pain. To me, it's like, it's physical pain is different. And what the church did with the cover up and everything made it worse, made it so much worse. And then over and over and over again, because it's this lie. But when you have the truth, even if the truth is this horrible thing, it's cliche, but it's true. The truth does set you free. And when he died, and I realized that I didn't feel any safer, I didn't feel any better, I didn't feel anything. I realized that it's not even about him. That trauma, I think for me, it's about him, but it's that added piece. That's why my heart just went out so much to the Jane Does, because it's bad enough to have that happen. Just by itself could be the most traumatic thing in your life to happen. But to have the group that you have, that's supposed to be your church, that's supposed to be your people, not have your back on that is a level of betrayal that I hope most people never get to experience.
Absolutely. God, that's so important. Rachel McCool-Helton. Natalie is one of my favorite guests you've ever had on. Can't wait to see more of her.
That's so sweet.
Laura FM asks, did you ever deal with any of the Int Ranch cadets in any time, or know any of them, like Christina Webster?
No. And I feel like I would remember somebody who had the same last name. I mean, I had my married name then. The only time I remember, and I think about him sometime, there was this boy, his parents were at Int, and he was like, he had somebody caring for him while the parents were at Int. I always wondered what happened to him, but of course it's no help because I can't remember his name. I think it was Brendan or Brandon. And he was probably only like 6 or 7 at the time. And I can see his dad's face, but I don't remember his name. Most of the cadets that I knew were the ones at PAC.
There's
and
so
I would
many
love
Brandons
to talk to
and
any of them.
Brendans.
If they grew up and if they remember, I would love to connect with them.
Super Pup says, this conversation validates just how small Scientology is in the universe. Despite your age gap, you know so many of the same people. Thank you both for taking the time to share your experiences. That's true. Nisi, never stop doing this important work. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And Telperian, great. Now I'm crying like Aaron too.
It's good though. It's good to feel your emotions. I was told that by 3 different neurologists.
LJ says, never in, but my heart and brain tell me Scientology needs to be brought to justice for its crimes.
Absolutely.
Colblue. Hopefully healing is happening.
It is not recovery, but healing.
You know, yeah, that one word doesn't trigger me like the other word does.
Yeah, because it's different. I think, with healing, it's this, for me, it's letting go. It's to where something becomes more neutral than something that I feel like I need to, like, I don't have the words, but kind of describes it.
Jaded Neko. Love and support AA Run. I cannot wait to support the new foundation. That's very nice.
That's exciting.
And Not a Sheeple. I need a t-shirt that says a never end keyboard warrior. I was not planning on crying tonight, but what the hell?
And I'm also proud to say that the third generation of my family, for me, because, we had 3 generations in Scientology. I was the second generation. My kids were the third. The fourth generation, my grandchildren are never ends. My grandchildren have never been in Scientology. They're 6 and 2. They never existed during our time in Scientology. They are the first generation in, I guess, 4 generations. Unless you count Grandpa Dad, then it'd be like 5. Depends on how you count him.
That's right.
Yeah, it'd be almost 5. So I feel like I carry a unique perspective of having grown up in Scientology and having parents in Scientology, but then raising children into adulthood in Scientology who now have children. And my grandkids I'm so proud to say my grandkids are never ends. I'm going to get them shirts made. Never end, never end. That's why I love the never ends. I love all the ex-Scientologists too and everything everybody's doing, but I cannot stress that enough. You never end Scientologists are amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, don't forget, this is Natalie's YouTube channel, Tonka Talk, Lake Minnetonka Community and Connection. I have a link in the description down below, and we'll do a lot more stuff together. So people,
yeah, totally. And you can help me figure out the YouTube thing.
Absolutely, it'll be my pleasure. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening. Thank you, as always, to everyone who watches until the very end, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not,